In the quiet lakeside town of Pine Haven, Mark Ortega stacks paint cans with the same careful precision he once used to build a life with his late wife Sarah. At 52, his weathered hands tell the story of a man who measures success not in dollars, but in his 10-year-old daughter's laughter echoing through their modest home above the hardware store. When billionaire Vivian Carlisle walks through his door with an offer that could change everything, $1 million for a one-year marriage, Mark's world tilts on its axis. She needs the appearance of family as she faces her diagnosis. He needs the money to save his daughter's future. But can a business arrangement between two wounded souls ever become something real? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors of Ortega Hardware as Mark pulled the chain that brought the overhead fluorescents humming to life. 6:30 sharp, same as every weekday for the past 8 years since Sarah's passing. The ritual never changed. Unlock the front door, flip the sign from closed to open, count yesterday's modest receipts, and arrange the day's priorities in his mind like the neat rows of screws and bolts that lined his shelves. Pine Haven had seen better decades. The lakeside town that once bustled with summer tourists and year-round fishing enthusiasts now struggled against the tide of big-box stores an hour's drive toward the interstate. Mark's hardware store occupied the corner of Main and Elm, a brick building his grandfather had purchased in 1962 with dreams bigger than the town could sustain. Those dreams had passed to Mark's father, then to Mark himself, each generation adding layers of hope and disappointment, like paint on the store's weathered exterior walls. Behind the counter, Mark's wedding ring caught the morning light knot on his finger where it belonged, but suspended on a thin gold chain around his neck, tucked beneath his flannel shirt. He'd stopped wearing it on his hand 2 years ago when Lily asked why Daddy still wore it if Mommy was in heaven. The question had no good answer, so he'd moved it closer to his heart instead. The apartment above the store held the real treasures of Mark's life. Every morning at 7, he'd hear the shower running, followed by Lily's bare feet pattering across the hardwood as she gathered her school things. She'd inherited Sarah's auburn hair and quick smile, but her morning routine was pure Mark, methodical, purposeful, never rushed even when running late. "Dad, have you seen my music folder?" Lily's voice carried down the narrow staircase that connected their living space to the store below. "Kitchen table, under your math homework," Mark called back, already knowing exactly where she'd left it. Lily's sheet music collection had grown thick over the past 2 years, dog-eared pieces ranging from beginner exercises to advanced compositions that made Mark's chest swell with pride and worry in equal measure. Each page represented hours of practice, dreams taking shape, and money he couldn't quite afford to spend. Mrs. Crawford charged $35 for weekly piano lessons, a bargain by any standard, but a stretch for Mark's budget. Lily's talent had outgrown simple exercises months ago. She needed advanced instruction, competition opportunities, summer programs, pathways to scholarships that could carry her toward the conservatory education Sarah had dreamed of for their daughter. The numbers haunted Mark's quiet moments. Mortgage, payments of $800 monthly on a building that appraised for less each year. Utilities, insurance, business license fees, inventory costs, all competing against grocery money and Lily's growing needs. The college fund Sarah had started sat nearly empty, depleted by medical bills and the lean years following her death when grief had clouded Mark's business judgment. At 7:15, Lily bounded down the stairs with her backpack bouncing against her hip. She'd grown 3 inches in the past year, making her look startlingly like Sarah. At that age, all legs and elbows and infectious energy. "Morning, Dad." She wrapped her arms around his waist, a daily ritual that anchored them both. "Mrs. Crawford wants to enter me in the regional competition next month. The entry fee is only $40. Only $40. Mark kept his expression neutral while calculating. Groceries for a week, or half the electric bill, or a chance for Lily to showcase the gift that burned so bright in her small hands. "We'll figure it out," he said, the same answer he'd given. For dance classes they couldn't afford, school field trips that required careful budgeting, birthday parties where he'd learned to make magic from very little. Right now, focus on getting to school on time. The school bus wheezed to a stop outside, and Lily grabbed her lunch bag from the counter. Mark had packed it the night before: peanut butter sandwich, apple, string cheese, and a note that read, "You make every day brighter. Love, Dad." She'd stopped reading the notes aloud, but he noticed she still tucked them into her desk at school. "See you tonight, Dad. Don't forget Mrs. Henderson is picking me up for piano lesson." A door chimed as Lily rushed out, leaving Mark alone with the familiar weight of another day. He loved Mrs. Henderson like family. The 70-year-old widow had appointed herself Lily's honorary grandmother after Sarah's death, providing rides to lessons and occasional dinners when Mark worked late. But accepting help never sat easily with him. Even from someone as generous as Eleanor Henderson. By 8 o'clock, the first customers began trickling in. Tom Bradley arrived with coffee for both of them, a friendship ritual that dated back to high school. Tom ran the town's only remaining diner, another business that survived more on stubbornness than profit margins. "Morning, Mark. How's our girl?" "Growing too fast. She wants to enter some piano competition." Tom settled onto the stool behind the counter, a privilege earned through decades of friendship. Sarah would have been proud. Sarah would have found a way to pay for it. The words came out sharper than Mark intended. He softened his tone. "Sorry, didn't sleep much last night." "Money troubles?" Mark nodded toward the stack of envelopes beside the register bills arranged by due date, each one a small crisis waiting to unfold. The mortgage payment was 3 days overdue. The business insurance premium came due next week. Lily needed new school clothes, and winter was approaching with its promise of higher heating bills. "Talk to the bank about extending the loan terms," Mark said. "Henderson, the loan officer, not our Mrs. Henderson, says they've done all they can. Property values around here aren't exactly climbing." Tom's weathered face creased with concern. "You thought about selling? Moving somewhere with better opportunities?" The question stabbed deeper than Tom probably intended. Mark had considered it during the darkest months after Sarah's death, when every corner of Pine Haven echoed with memories. But this was Lily's home, the only place she remembered her mother. Sarah was buried in Pine Haven Cemetery, her grave visible from their apartment window on clear days. Leaving felt like abandoning her all over again. "This is where we belong," Mark said simply. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Mrs. Patterson bought light bulbs and complained about her neighbor's fence. Jake Morrison picked up paint for his boat dock. 3 summer residents stopped by for fishing supplies, their presence a reminder of the seasonal economy that kept Pine Haven alive by the thinnest margins. Between customers, Mark's mind wandered to Sarah's dreams. She'd worked part-time at the elementary school while pursuing her teaching degree, every spare dollar designated for Lily's future. "Music lessons now, college later," she'd say while balancing their checkbook at the kitchen table. "Lily's got something special, Mark. We just need to nurture it until it can stand on its own." The dreams had died with Sarah, replaced by the immediate demands of survival. Mark had become expert at managing crisis, at stretching dollars and making do. But watching Lily's talent bloom while lacking resources to properly support it felt like failing Sarah all over again. Lunchtime brought a brief lull in customers. Mark heated leftover soup and sat behind the counter, reviewing invoices. The numbers told a story he didn't want to read. Business declining, expenses rising, reserves exhausted. Even if he cut every possible corner, eliminated every non-essential expense, the arithmetic pointed toward an inevitable reckoning. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Crawford. Lily played beautifully today. I'd like to discuss advanced opportunities. Could we schedule a meeting? Advanced opportunities. The phrase should have filled Mark with joy, but instead it settled like lead in his stomach. Every opportunity required money he didn't have better. Instruments, intensive workshops, travel to competitions. Lily's talent was outgrowing his ability to support it. That evening, Mark climbed the stairs to their apartment as shadows lengthened across Pine Haven's quiet streets. Lily sat at the kitchen table with homework spread before her. The piano bench pushed back from their upright piano, Sarah's piano, purchased used when they'd first married and dreamed of filling their home with music. How was school? Good. Mrs. Crawford wants to talk to you about something important. Lily's eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. She says I might be ready for advanced study. Mark's chest tightened. Advanced study? Like summer programs, or maybe private lessons with a real conservatory teacher. She knows someone who drives up from the city twice a month. Each word represented hundreds of dollars Mark didn't have. He forced a smile. That sounds wonderful, honey. We'll see what Mrs. Crawford has to say. After dinner, Mark helped Lily with homework while she practiced scales with one hand and solved math problems with the other, skill that never failed to amaze him. Later, as she prepared for bed, he stood in the doorway of her room, watching her arrange her sheet music for tomorrow's lesson. Dad? Lily's voice was small in the lamplight. Are we poor? The question hung in the air like smoke. Mark chose his words carefully. We have everything we need, and we have each other. That makes us pretty rich. But not rich enough for the competition? Mark's throat constricted. Children possessed an uncomfortable clarity about adult struggles, seeing through careful explanations to the truth beneath. We'll find a way, Lily. We always do. She nodded, accepting his promise with the faith children reserved for their parents. After tucking her in, Mark retreated to the kitchen, where bills awaited his attention. He spread them across the table. Like a hand of cards in a game, he couldn't win mortgage, utilities, insurance, business supplies, groceries. The numbers never balanced, no matter how he rearranged them. Outside the kitchen window, Pine Haven settled into evening quiet. Streetlights reflected off the lake, and the distant mountains stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. Sarah had loved this view, often standing at this same window while planning their future. Mark wondered what she would think of there. Life now reduced to a careful dance between necessity and dreams deferred. He pulled Sarah's wedding ring from beneath his shirt, letting it catch the kitchen light. 3 years since her cancer diagnosis, 18 months of treatment, 8 years of learning to be both father and mother to Lily. The ring had witnessed all of it: hope, desperation, loss, and the slow process of building something new from the pieces left behind. Tomorrow would bring another day of managing scarcity while protecting Lily's dreams. But tonight, in the quiet apartment above Ortega Hardware, Mark allowed himself a moment to miss the woman who had believed anything was possible with enough love and determination. She'd been wrong about beating cancer, but maybe, just maybe, she'd been right about everything else. The black Mercedes sedan pulled up to Ortega Hardware at precisely 10:30 on a Tuesday morning, its polished surface reflecting Pine Haven's modest storefronts like a mirror from another world. Mark looked up from his inventory clipboard as the engine's quiet purr died, replaced by the soft click of expensive heels on pavement. The woman who emerged commanded attention without trying. Tall and elegant, she moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Her silver hair was styled in a sophisticated bob that probably cost more than Mark's monthly grocery budget, and her navy blazer bore the subtle signs of custom tailoring. She paused on the sidewalk, studying the faded Ortega Hardware sign with an expression Mark couldn't quite read. When she pushed through the front door, the bell chimed with unusual clarity, as if even the old brass had decided to announce something significant. She surveyed the narrow aisles, an organized chaos of Mark's inventory, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Good morning," Mark said, setting his clipboard aside. "Can I help you find something?" "I hope so." Her voice carried the cultured tones of private schools and boardrooms, but underneath lay something warmer, a hint of the girl who might have once skipped stones on Pine Haven's lake. "I'm looking for restoration supplies. Specifically, materials to renovate a house that's been empty for quite some time." Mark nodded toward the back corner where he kept wood stains, sandpaper, and refinishing compounds. "What kind of restoration are we talking about? Interior, exterior, or both?" "Everything." She followed him through the aisles, her heels clicking against the worn wooden floors. "The property has been neglected for nearly 15 years. I imagine it needs attention from foundation to roof." As they walked, Mark found himself stealing glances at her profile. Something familiar tugged at his memory, the shape of her nose, the way she held her shoulders, the careful way she examined each product label, as if quality mattered more than price. 15 years is a long time for a house to sit empty, Mark said, pulling a gallon of primer from the shelf. "Mice, water damage, foundation settling. You might want to bring in a contractor for a full assessment before you start buying supplies." She smiled, and the expression transformed her face from merely striking to genuinely beautiful. "Wise advice. Though I suspect the house has good bones. It was built to last." "Which property, if you don't mind me asking?" "I know most of the empty houses around Pine Haven. The old Carlisle place on Maple Ridge Road." Mark's hand stilled on the paint can he'd been examining. The Carlisle estate, 3 acres of overgrown gardens, and a sprawling Victorian that had once been the crown jewel of Pine Haven's golden age. He remembered riding his bike past it as a child, intimidated by its grandeur and the rumored wealth of its owners. "You're not thinking of flipping it, are you?" The question came out before Mark could stop himself. "Because that house, it's got history, character. It would be a shame to see it turned into some modern monstrosity." Her laugh was genuine, unguarded. "No flipping. I plan to live there." Something in her voice made Mark look at her more carefully. The angle of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when considering his words' memory, clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. "Vivien? Vivian Carlisle?" She turned fully toward him, surprise flickering across her features. "I'm sorry. Do we—" She studied his face with the same intensity she'd given the paint labels. "Mark Ortega? Guilty as charged." He found himself smiling despite his confusion. "Though you look considerably different than you did at 12 years old. You remember me?" Wonder softened her voice. "I wasn't sure anyone would. It's been, 40 years since my last summer here?" "More or less. You used to come in with your grandfather, buying supplies for whatever project he had cooking. He always let you pick out the nails. He said choosing the right fastener was the most important part of any job." Vivian's eyes grew distant. "I'd forgotten that." The years collapsed between them. Vivian Carlisle, the rich girl who spent summers in Pine Haven while her parents traveled Europe, building forts and fishing from the dock with the local children, who were alternately intimidated and fascinated by her city sophistication. She'd been Mark's first crush, though he'd never worked up the courage to tell her. "So you're coming home," Mark said. "Something like that." She picked up a paintbrush, testing its bristles with professional assessment. "Though it feels strange calling it home after all this time. I barely remember the last summer I spent here." "You were different after that summer, quieter. Your grandfather was worried." Vivian set the brush down carefully. "My parents died that fall, car accident in Switzerland. Everything changed after that." The simple words carried decades of weight. Mark remembered the rumors that had circulated through Pine Haven, the wealthy Carlisle girl whose summer visits stopped abruptly, whose grandparents sold the estate a few years later and moved away, their grief too heavy for the house that held so many memories. "I'm sorry," Mark said. "I didn't know. How could you?" "I was shipped off to boarding school, spent holidays with relatives. By the time I graduated college, Pine Haven felt like something from a dream." She ran her fingers along a paint sample, card. "But lately, I've been thinking about dreams. About the difference between what we build and what we inherit." There was something in her tone, a carefully controlled emotion, that made Mark want to ask questions he had no right to voice. Instead, he focused on her immediate needs. "The Carlisle place will need significant work. Foundation inspection. Electrical update. Probably new plumbing. Are you planning to hire local contractors?" "I'd prefer to, yes. This town gave me some of my happiest memories. I'd like to return the favor, if possible." They spent the next hour going through restoration basics while Vivien took notes in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She asked intelligent questions, listened carefully to Mark's suggestions, and gradually dropped the polished veneer that had initially made her seem untouchable. "You know," Mark said as he tallied her considerable order, "if you're serious about bringing the house back to its original glory, you might want to talk to Mrs. Henderson. She's lived here forever, and her late husband helped build the addition your grandparents added in the 70s. Mrs. Henderson, Eleanor Henderson? You remember her? She made the most incredible chocolate chip cookies. Used to bring them over when grandfather was teaching me to fish." Vivian's smile was pure nostalgia. "Is she still?" "Very much alive, and still making cookies. She lives 2 streets over from the hardware store." As Mark rang up her purchases, Vivien pulled out a credit card that gleamed like black metal. The transaction went through without a pause, numbers that represented more money than Mark typically saw in a month. "Thank you," she said, tucking the receipt into her portfolio. "It's been wonderful seeing you again, Mark. Really wonderful." She was halfway to the door when she turned back, something shifting in her expression, a decision being made in real time. "Mark, could I ask you something personal?" He nodded, curious about the sudden change in her demeanor. "Are you happy? I mean, truly happy with your life here?" The question caught him off guard. That's a complicated question. The complicated ones are usually the most important. She stepped closer to the counter, her voice dropping to something more intimate than their previous conversation. "I've been watching Pine Haven change over the years. Driving through occasionally, checking real estate listings online. I know times have been difficult for small towns like this. We get by," Mark said carefully. "Do you? Because I've been doing research, Mark, about old friends, about the town, about what happened to the places and people I remembered." Her blue eyes held his steadily. "I know about your wife, about your daughter, about the struggles you've been facing." Heat crawled up Mark's neck. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know that a good man is trying to hold together a life that's slowly falling apart despite his best efforts. I know that a brilliant little girl deserves every opportunity to develop her talents. And I know that sometimes the universe puts people in each other's paths for reasons that don't immediately make sense." Mark's chest tightened. "What are you getting at, Vivien?" She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card thick, cream-colored stock with elegant lettering. "I have a proposition for you. Unusual, perhaps even shocking, but potentially beneficial for both of us." Mark took the card, noting the weight of the paper, the embossed gold lettering that spelled out Vivian Carlisle, CEO, Carlisle Enterprises. "What kind of proposition?" Vivien straightened her shoulders, adopting the bearing of a woman accustomed to boardroom negotiations. "I need a husband, Mark, for 1 year. A public marriage that provides me with the appearance of family and stability during a difficult time. In exchange, I'm prepared to offer you $1 million. The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" $1 million for a marriage of convenience. Separate bedrooms, no intimate expectations, but public appearances as a married couple. After 1 year, we divorce amicably, and you keep the money to secure your daughter's future. Mark set the business card on the counter as if it might explode. You're serious, completely serious. He struggled for words. That's insane. People don't just buy husbands, Vivien. Marriage isn't a business transaction. Isn't it? Her voice remained calm, professional. How many marriages survive because of financial stability? How many fail because of money problems? I'm simply being honest about the terms. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Besides, a fake husband? For the first time since making her proposition, Vivian's composure cracked slightly. I have Parkinson's disease, Mark. Early stage, but progressive. I've built a billion-dollar company, but I'm facing the rest of my life alone. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I need the dignity of family during the years I have left. Someone who knew me before the money, before the success. Someone who might remember the girl who once thought Pine Haven was the most beautiful place in the world. The admission hung between them like a bridge Mark was afraid to cross. He looked at her, really looked, and saw past the designer clothes and corporate confidence to something raw and frightened. You have 48 hours to consider the offer, Vivien said, her professional mask sliding back into place. Think about your daughter's future, Mark. Think about what Sarah would want for her. The mention of Sarah's name felt like a slap. Don't, Mark said sharply. Don't bring my wife into this. I'm sorry. That was unfair. Vivien moved toward the door, then paused. But the offer stands. $1 million, 1 year of your life, and your daughter's future secured forever. She left without another word, the Mercedes purring away from Pine Haven's modest main street like a departing dream. Mark stood behind his counter, holding her business card and wondering if the last 10 minutes had actually happened. $1 million. The number seemed to pulse in the air around him, impossible and tempting and completely insane. He thought of Lily's piano lessons, her college fund, the mortgage payments that haunted his sleep. He thought of Sarah, who had always believed that love couldn't be bought or sold. But love wasn't what Vivien was offering. She was offering survival, wrapped in the most outrageous proposition Mark had ever heard. 40-8 hours to decide whether to sell a year of his life for his daughter's future. Mark stared at the ceiling above his bed, watching shadows shift as car headlights swept past the apartment window. 3:17 in the morning, and sleep remained as elusive as the solution to his impossible dilemma. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Vivien's voice. $1 million, 1 year of your life, and your daughter's future secured forever. The stack of overdue bills on his kitchen table seemed to pulse with accusatory red ink mortgage. Utilities, insurance premiums that would consume every dollar he'd managed to scrape together. Beside them sat Vivien's business card, innocuous cream-colored paper that might as well have been dynamite. By 5:30, Mark abandoned any pretense of rest. He dressed quietly and made his way downstairs to the hardware store, seeking solace in the familiar ritual of inventory and order. But even arranging paint cans couldn't quiet the war raging in his mind. You look like hell, Tom announced when he arrived at 7 with coffee and his usual blunt assessment. Insomnia or conscience? Both. Mark accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the steam as if it might provide clarity along with caffeine. Tom, what would you do if someone offered you a fortune for something that felt fundamentally wrong? Depends on the something and the size of the fortune. Tom settled onto his customary stool, studying Mark's haggard expression. This have anything to do with that fancy car I saw parked outside yesterday? Mark had forgotten how little escaped. Notice in Pine Haven. Maybe. Vivian Carlisle, right? Eleanor Henderson mentioned she'd spotted her around town. Said she looked exactly like her mother, elegant as hell, and twice as intimidating. She made me an offer. What kind of offer? Mark hesitated, and found himself spilling the entire story. Vivian's proposition. The $1 million price tag, the year-long marriage contract. Tom listened without interruption, his weathered face growing more incredulous with each detail. Sweet Jesus, Mark, $1 million? For marrying a stranger. Not a stranger. Someone you knew as kids? 40 years ago. Mark rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache of stress and sleeplessness. It's insane, Tom. People don't just buy husbands like ordering lumber. Rich people do stranger things every day. Tom's voice carried the pragmatism of a man who'd survived economic hardship through stubborn adaptability. Question is, what does your gut tell you about her motives? Mark considered this. She's dying, Tom. Parkinson's disease. She wants the appearance of family for her remaining years. And you need money for Lily's future. Not like this. Not by selling myself. Tom was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee while morning light crept through the store's windows. Sarah ever tell you about her great-aunt Mabel? No. Mabel married a man she barely knew during the Depression. Mail-order bride situation. He needed a wife to keep his farm. She needed escape from a father who drank away the family money. They had an arrangement, not a romance. Mark waited, sensing more to the story. 53 years later, when Mabel passed, that man cried for 3 days straight. Sometimes what starts as necessity becomes something else entirely. Tom met Mark's eyes steadily. Sometimes the heart finds its way despite our best efforts to protect it. At 8:45, Mark's phone buzzed with a text that made his stomach clench. Mr. Ortega, this is Jennifer Morrison from Pine Haven Savings. Could you come in today to discuss your mortgage account? We have some options to explore. Options. Banks speak for last chances before foreclosure proceedings. The meeting with Jennifer Morrison confirmed Mark's worst fears. Pine Haven Savings had been more patient than they should have been, considering his payment history. But corporate headquarters was demanding action on delinquent accounts. I can give you 30 days, Jennifer said, her expression genuinely apologetic. After that, I'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings. 30 days. Mark walked home through Pine Haven's quiet streets, past the lake where he and Sarah had once planned their future, past the cemetery where she now rested beneath. A simple headstone he'd chosen, because the elaborate ones felt like showing off to the dead dot at 3:30. Mrs. Henderson picked up Lily for piano lessons, as she had every Tuesday for the past 2 years. Lily bounded into the car with her sheet music folder, chattering excitedly about a new piece Mrs. Crawford had assigned. Mark watched from the store window as they drove away, his daughter's animated gestures visible through the rear windshield. Alone with his thoughts, Mark found himself researching Vivian Carlisle online. The search results painted a picture of remarkable success articles about her business acumen, interviews where she discussed innovation in e-commerce, photographs from charity galas where she smiled politely beside other wealthy philanthropists. But it was an older article that caught his attention, buried several pages deep in the search results. A business journal piece from 3 years earlier, discussing executives who'd overcome personal challenges. Vivien had mentioned her early struggles with family loss, the way grief had initially derailed her college plans before eventually fueling her determination to succeed. I learned that security isn't something you inherit, she'd been quoted as saying. It's something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice. But at the end of the day, money can't buy the things that matter most: connection, purpose, the feeling that your life has meaning beyond your bank account. The words resonated with uncomfortable truth. Mark had spent 8 years building security for himself and Lily, brick by brick, choice by choice. But his foundation was crumbling, and he was running out of time to shore it up. When Lily returned from her lesson, she was practically vibrating with excitement. Dad, Mrs. Crawford wants to enter me in 3 competitions this spring. There's one in the state capitol, another in Chicago, and a really big one in New York that could lead to scholarship opportunities. Mark's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. That's wonderful, honey. What would that involve? Entry fees, travel costs, maybe a new dress for performances. Lily's enthusiasm dimmed slightly as she processed the practical implications. It's expensive, isn't it? We'll figure it out, Mark said automatically, the same promise he'd been making for months. But later, as Lily practiced scales in their small apartment, Mark calculated the costs. Entry fees, hotel rooms, travel expenses, easily $3,000 for competitions that might or might not result in scholarship opportunities. Money he simply didn't have. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Mark sat at the kitchen table with Sarah's hope chest open before him. Inside, carefully preserved, were the journals she'd kept during their marriage plans, in dreams and gentle reminders to herself about what mattered most. One entry, dated just months before her diagnosis, made him pause. Watched Lily play today, while Mark worked on the fence. She gets lost in the music the way I used to get lost in lesson plans, completely absorbed, completely happy. We've talked about college funds and piano lessons and all the practical things, but what I really want for her is the freedom to chase her dreams without fear. Mark worries about providing enough, but he already gives her the most important thing. He believes in her completely. That belief is worth more than any trust fund. Mark closed the journal carefully, Sarah's words echoing in his mind. She'd been right about believing in Lily, but belief wouldn't pay for piano competitions or college tuition. Love wouldn't keep the bank from foreclosing on their home. At 11:30, Mark pulled Vivian's business card from his wallet and stared at it in the lamplight. The embossed lettering seemed to shimmer with possibility and compromise in equal measure. He thought about pride, his own stubborn insistence on handling everything alone. He thought about Sarah's dreams for Lily's future. He thought about the 30 days Jennifer Morrison had given him to find a solution that didn't exist. Most of all, he thought about Lily's excited voice describing competitions and scholarships and opportunities that hung just beyond their reach. Mark picked up his phone and dialed the number on the business card. It rang twice before Vivian's voice answered, alert despite the late hour. "Mark, I need to know more," he said quietly. "About the arrangement, about what you're really asking for." There was a pause then. "Would you like to meet tomorrow?" "Somewhere. We can talk privately?" "The old Carlisle place. 10 o'clock. I'll be there." Mark hung up and sat in the darkness of his kitchen, wondering if he'd just taken the first step toward salvation or made a deal with the devil. Outside, Pine Haven slept peacefully, unaware that one of its own was considering the most important decision of his life. In 12 hours, he would learn whether Vivian Carlisle's proposition was the answer to his prayers or the beginning of his moral downfall. The Carlisle estate looked like something from a Gothic novel, its Victorian silhouette etched against the morning sky with romantic decay. Overgrown ivy claimed the wraparound porch, and several shutters hung at dejected angles, but the bones of the house remained magnificent soaring gables, intricate gingerbread trim, and tall windows that had once looked out over manicured gardens. Mark arrived at 10 sharp, parking his dented pickup beside Vivian's Mercedes with a self-consciousness that irritated him. He was a man who'd never judged himself by his possessions, but something about this meeting made every worn edge of his life feel magnified. Vivien emerged from the house as he approached the front steps, and Mark was struck again by her transformation from the awkward 12-year-old he'd known. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater, casual clothes that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment, but her expression carried a vulnerability that expensive fabric couldn't hide. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing toward the porch where 2 folding chairs waited beside a thermos and coffee cups. "I thought we should talk somewhere that felt honest. This house doesn't know how to lie." They settled into the chairs, and Vivien poured coffee with steady hands. Mark noticed she favored her left side slightly, a subtle accommodation that spoke to her medical condition without drawing attention to it. "Tell me about the arrangement," Mark said without preamble. "The real terms, not the elevator pitch." Vivien nodded, as if she'd expected his directness. 1 year, legally married, but living as housemates. "I maintain a suite in the main house. You and Lily have your own space completely separate. Public appearances when necessary for social or business functions, but no intimate relationship, expected or desired. And the money? $1 million, transferred to accounts of your choosing upon signing the marriage certificate. No strings attached, no repayment expected regardless of circumstances." Mark leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "What aren't you telling me, Vivien?" "Because this arrangement benefits me far more than it benefits you. And successful. People don't make one-sided deals." A smile ghosted across her features. "You always were perceptive. Even as a kid, you saw through the surface to what people were really thinking. So what am I missing?" Vivien set down her coffee cup and turned to face him fully. "I'm dying, Mark. Not immediately, but inevitably. Parkinson's is progressive, and I have the aggressive variant. 5 years, maybe 7 if I'm fortunate. During those years, I'll lose control of my body, my independence, my dignity." The words hung heavy in the morning air, weighted with a finality that made Mark's chest tighten. "I've spent my entire adult life building a business empire, accumulating wealth and influence, and all the things people assume equal success. But at the end of the day, I go home to an empty penthouse and eat dinner alone while watching the news. I attend galas and charity functions, surrounded by people who know my net worth, but not my middle name. And marriage would change that? Marriage to you would." She met his eyes steadily. "You knew me before the money, Mark. Before I became. Vivian Carlisle, CEO. You remember the girl who helped your grandfather sort nails and thought Pine Haven was the center of the universe. I need someone who can see past what I've become to who I actually am." Mark considered this, turning her words over in his mind like pieces of a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Why me specifically? There must be other people from your past." "There aren't." The admission came quietly. "Boarding school, then college, then building the business. I never learned how to maintain friendships or relationships that weren't transactional. Everyone in my current life wants something from me. You're the only person I know who might actually say no to $1 million if it felt wrong." The observation stung with its accuracy. Mark had already spent hours wrestling with exactly that possibility. What about Lily? "How do you envision this affecting her?" "Lily would benefit tremendously. The finest music instruction, summer programs, college without debt, opportunities limited only by her talent and ambition." Vivien's voice warmed when she spoke about his daughter. "But more than that, she'd have stability. A home she couldn't lose. Security that would allow her to focus on growing up instead of worrying about grown-up problems. She's not part of the contract, Vivien. Whatever arrangement we make, Lily's welfare comes first. I would expect nothing less. That's part of what convinced me you were the right person for this." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching morning light filter through the overgrown trees that surrounded the estate. Mark found himself imagining the property as it must have been during Vivien's childhood summer's gardens, blooming, windows gleaming, the sound of children's laughter echoing across the grounds. "Tell me about your diagnosis," he said finally. "When did you find out?" 18 months ago. I'd been experiencing tremors, balance issues, changes in my handwriting. My doctor referred me to a specialist, who referred me to another specialist, until finally someone had the courage to give me a name for what was happening. How are you handling it? Medically, I mean. The best treatments money can buy. Medications that slow the progression, physical therapy, dietary changes. I have a neurologist at Johns Hopkins who takes my calls personally. She paused. But medicine can only do so much. The rest is about how I choose to spend whatever time I have left. Mark thought about Sarah's battle with cancer, the months of hope and treatment, and gradual acceptance that some fights couldn't be won. Sarah always said that illness taught her the difference between surviving and living. The trick was figuring out how to do both. Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Mark's hand moved unconsciously to the chain around his neck, where Sarah's wedding ring rested against his heart. She would have liked you, I think. She had a soft spot for people who hid their kindness behind practical exteriors. And what would she think of this arrangement? The question Mark had been dreading. He'd spent the entire sleepless night wondering what Sarah would say about his potential marriage to another woman, even a marriage of convenience. I think, he said slowly, that Sarah would want Lily to have every opportunity to chase her dreams. She would want me to be happy, eventually. But she would also want me to be sure I wasn't selling my soul for financial security. And are you? Selling your soul? Mark looked at the woman beside him, successful, vulnerable, facing an uncertain future with quiet dignity. I don't know yet, but I'm beginning to think the question might be whether I'd be selling my soul by saying no. Vivien reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. I've had my lawyers draw up a preliminary contract. Take it home, read it carefully, have your own attorney review it if you'd like. The terms are exactly as I've described. No hidden clauses, no escape hatches that would leave you empty-handed. Mark accepted the envelope, surprised by its weight. How long do I have to decide? As long as you need. But Mark? She stood and gathered the coffee things with efficient movements. Don't sacrifice your happiness for your daughter's future. Sarah was right. There's a difference between surviving and living. I want both of us to find a way to do both. As Mark drove back to Pine Haven, the envelope on his passenger seat seemed to pulse with possibility. At home, he found Mrs. Henderson waiting on his front porch with a covered casserole dish and the determined expression of a woman on a mission. Eleanor, Mark said, climbing out of his truck, to what do I owe the pleasure? Beef stew for tonight's dinner and a conversation that's long overdue. She followed him into the store, her sharp eyes noting his distracted demeanor. You look like a man wrestling with big decisions. Just the usual business concerns. Hogwash. Mrs. Henderson set the casserole on his counter with authority. I've been watching you for 8 years, Mark Ortega. I know the difference between business concerns and soul-deep worrying. Mark found himself smiling despite his turmoil. Eleanor Henderson had appointed herself Pine Haven's unofficial guardian angel, dispensing wisdom and casseroles with equal generosity. Hypothetically, he said, what would you think about someone accepting help from an unexpected source? Help that came with strings attached? Hypothetically, I'd say that depends on the strings and whether they'd strangle you or just tie you up in knots for a while. She studied his face with grandmother's intuition. Help from someone you care about is a gift. Help from someone you don't trust is a trap. Help from someone you're not sure about yet, well, that's just life being complicated. And how do you tell the difference? You trust your gut and prepare for the possibility that you might be wrong. Eleanor's expression softened. Mark, honey, I don't know what opportunity has presented itself, but I do know this. You've been carrying the world on your shoulders for 8 years. Maybe it's time to let someone else help bear the load. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Mark spread Vivian's contract across his kitchen table. The legal language was dense, but clear: a year-long marriage with specific obligations and protections for both parties. The financial terms were exactly as she described. $1 million. No repayment required, no conditions beyond the marriage itself. But it was the personal clauses that gave him pause. Provisions for Lily's education and care. requirements for public appearances but strict privacy protections. Language that seemed designed to protect his dignity as much as Vivian's interest. As he read, Mark found himself thinking about the woman who had drafted these terms, someone who understood that money couldn't buy respect or affection, but who hoped it might purchase the appearance of family and the comfort of companionship. By midnight, Mark had reached a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He picked up his phone and dialed Vivian's number. "I'll do it," he said when she answered, "but I have conditions of my own." "Name them." "Lily comes first, always. Any public appearances involving her require my approval. And if either of us becomes genuinely unhappy with the arrangement, we end it early with no financial penalties." "Agreed." "Anything else?" Mark thought about Sarah's journals, about the dreams they'd shared for their daughter's future. "I want to know you, Vivien. Not the CEO or the businesswoman, but the person underneath. If we're going to be married, even on paper, I want it to be real in the ways that matter." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sound that might have been tears. "Thank you," Vivien whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." 3 weeks later, Mark stood before the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie and wondering how his life had become something he barely recognized. In 2 hours, he would marry Vivian Carlisle in a simple ceremony at Pine Haven's courthouse, surrounded by their small circle of friends and family. The ring box in his pocket contained matching gold bands, not Sarah's ring, which would remain close to his heart, but something new for a relationship that defied every conventional definition of marriage. Downstairs, Lily was helping Mrs. Henderson arrange flowers, her excitement infectious as she chattered about her new stepmother and the family they were about to become. Mark had worried about her reaction to the marriage, but Lily had surprised him with her mature understanding and genuine happiness for his future. In just 2 hours, Mark would step into a future he'd never imagined, married to a woman he was only beginning to know, bound by a contract that might become something much deeper. For the first time in months, he felt something that might have been hope. The courthouse ceremony had been deliberately simple. Judge Peterson, Mrs. Henderson as witness, Tom standing awkwardly in his best suit, and Lily clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she'd insisted on picking herself. Now, 3 days into their married life, Mark stood in the kitchen of the restored Carlisle estate, marveling at how quickly the extraordinary could begin to feel routine. The marriage contract lay signed and notarized in Vivian's safe, its formal language transformed into lived reality. $1 million had appeared in Mark's accounts as promised, the number so large it seemed almost fictional. But the real transformation was more subtle, the way Vivien had quietly arranged for Lily's advanced piano instruction, the careful respect she showed for their existing routines, the stack of legal documents that had transferred ownership of Ortega hardware into a trust that would provide steady income regardless of Pine Haven's economic fluctuations. "Dad, look at this." Lily's voice echoed through the grand foyer as she bounded down the main staircase, sheet music clutched in her hands. Vivien found all these old pieces in the music room. Some of them are from composers I've never even heard of. Mark watched his daughter's excitement with mixed emotions. The Carlisle estate boasted a proper music room with a concert grand, piano that had been meticulously restored along with the rest of the house. Lily had claimed the space immediately, her natural talent seeming to expand in response to the superior instrument. "Let me guess," Mark said, accepting the sheet music Lily thrust toward him. "Vivien suggested you try something challenging? She said these pieces were played at the house when she was my age. Her grandmother was a pianist, too." Lily's eyes sparkled with the kind of enthusiasm that had been missing during their financial struggles. "She wants to hear me play them tonight after dinner." The easy familiarity in Lily's voice when she mentioned Vivien struck Mark as both wonderful and slightly unsettling. His daughter had accepted their unusual family arrangement with the adaptability of childhood, but Mark worried about her growing attachment to a relationship that had a predetermined expiration date. "Where is Vivien this morning?" Mark asked, noting his wife's absence from the breakfast table. "Conference call with her lawyers about some business thing. She said not to wait for her." Lily gathered her sheet music with careful precision. "Dad, are you happy here?" The question caught Mark off guard. "What makes you ask that? You get this look sometimes. Like you're not sure if you belong." Lily tilted her head, studying him with uncomfortable perception. "But you do belong. We both do. Vivien chose us, remember?" Before Mark could respond, footsteps clicked across the marble foyer, and Vivien appeared in the kitchen doorway. She wore a tailored business suit that suggested video conferences rather than casual morning conversations. But her expression was warm as she surveyed her new family. "Good morning," she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot Mark had prepared. "I hope I didn't miss anything important." "Just Lily discovering your grandmother's sheet music collection," Mark replied, noting the slight tremor in Vivien's left hand as she lifted her cup. The symptoms were subtle, but increasingly noticeable to someone who'd learned to watch for them. "Ah, the Chopin etudes. Those were my grandmother's favorites." Vivien's smile held genuine fondness. She used to say that Chopin understood the difference between playing notes and making music. "Will you teach me the difference?" Lily asked with a directness that made adults either laugh or squirm. "I'm hardly qualified to teach anyone piano, but I'd be happy to share what I remember about my grandmother's approach." Vivien's expression grew thoughtful. She believed that music was a conversation between the composer and the performer, between the performer and the audience, between the past and the present. Mark found himself studying Vivien as she spoke, noting the way her corporate polish softened when she discussed family memories. The woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals became someone gentler, more vulnerable, when she allowed herself to remember the girl who'd spent summers in Pine Haven. After Lily left for school, Mark and Vivien settled into the uncomfortable routine of learning to live together. Their arrangement required public appearances as a married couple, but private interactions remained carefully choreographed to maintain emotional distance. They shared meals, discussed Lily's needs, and maintained polite conversation, but deeper. Intimacy, emotional or physical, remained off limits by mutual agreement. "I need to ask you about something," Vivien said as they finished breakfast in the sun-drenched morning room that overlooked the restored gardens. "The Pine Haven Community Foundation Gala is next Saturday. It's an important fundraising event, and as the new Mrs. Carlisle, my presence is expected." Mark nodded, understanding the implication. "Our first public appearance as a married couple, exactly? Are you comfortable with that level of scrutiny? Pine Haven is small enough that everyone will be watching, wondering about our relationship." The truth was that Mark had been dreading exactly this scenario, standing beside Vivien in formal wear, playing the role of devoted husband, while their entire community analyzed every gesture and expression for signs of authentic affection. What kind of scrutiny are we talking about? Cocktail conversation, probably some pointed questions about our whirlwind romance, expectations that we'll appear happily married. Vivien's tone remained neutral, but Mark detected underlying tension. "I can make excuses. Attend alone if you're not ready." "No." The word came out more firmly than Mark had intended. "We agreed to public appearances. I won't hide from our arrangement." Something shifted in Vivien's expression: surprise, perhaps, or relief. "Thank you. I know this isn't easy. Neither is Parkinson's disease, but you're facing that with dignity. I can handle a few hours of small talk and suspicious glances." They spent the morning discussing logistics, formal wear, arrival time, the names and backgrounds of people they'd likely encounter. Vivien approached the planning with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to business negotiations, but Mark sensed nervous energy beneath her professional demeanor. "Vivien," he said as they reviewed the guest list, What aren't you telling me about this event? She looked up from her notes, and for a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. These are people who knew me as a child, Mark. People who remember my grandparents, who watched me grow up during those summer visits. They're going to judge not just our marriage, but whether I've changed too much, become too different from the girl they once knew. The admission revealed a vulnerability Mark hadn't expected. For all her success and sophistication, Vivien was still, in some ways, the girl seeking approval from her childhood community. And what if you have changed? Mark asked gently. What if you're different from who you were 40 years ago? Then I'll have lost the last connection to who I used to be before money and success redefined everything. Her voice carried a weight of longing that made Mark's chest tighten. Sometimes I wonder if the girl who sorted nails with your grandfather still exists, or if she's been completely consumed by the woman who built Carlisle Enterprises. Mark studied her face, the elegant cheekbones and carefully styled hair that marked her as someone of substance and means, but also the blue eyes that held echoes of the awkward 12-year-old who'd once helped his grandfather with summer projects. She exists, he said quietly. I see her every time you talk to Lily about music, every time you look out at the lake like you're remembering something precious. Money might have changed your circumstances, Vivien, but it hasn't erased who you fundamentally are. The grateful smile that crossed her features was worth the risk of honesty. For the first time since their marriage, Mark felt like he was seeing the real woman behind the carefully constructed persona. That afternoon brought their first real test as a married couple. Dr. Helena Martinez, Vivien's neurologist, arrived for a scheduled consultation that would assess her current condition and adjust her treatment plan. Mark had been invited to attend, not as a business partner, but as a spouse who needed to understand the progression of his wife's illness. Mrs. Carlisle's symptoms have remained relatively stable over the past 6 months, Dr. Martinez explained, as they sat in Vivien's private study. The medication regimen is effective, but we need to discuss long-term planning. Mark listened as the doctor outlined the probable progression of Vivien's condition: increased tremors, potential balance issues, cognitive changes that might occur in later stages. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality. His wife was facing a progressive loss of the physical control that had always defined her confidence. What about timeline? Mark asked, noting how Vivien's hands remained carefully folded in her lap throughout the discussion. Individual cases vary significantly. Mrs. Carlisle has the resources for the best possible care, which can slow progression considerably. But we're looking at 5 to 7 years before more serious limitations become evident. 5 to 7 years. A number hung in the air between them, marking the probable boundaries of their shared future. Mark found himself doing involuntary math. Lily would be in high school when Vivien's condition became more challenging, possibly in college when it reached advanced stages. After Dr. Martinez left, Mark and Vivien sat in silence in the study. Afternoon light slanting through tall windows that overlooked the lake. The weight of medical reality had settled between them like a third presence in the room. Are you having second thoughts? Vivien asked finally. About what? About binding yourself to someone whose best years are probably behind her. Mark considered the question seriously. Are you having second thoughts about trusting a hardware store owner with your final chapter? That's different. You're getting $1 million and a chance to secure Lily's future. And you're getting a husband who knew you before you became successful. Someone who remembers the girl who thought Pine Haven was the center of the universe. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully controlled expression. We both made this deal because we needed something the other could provide. The question isn't whether we're having second thoughts. It's whether we're brave enough to let this arrangement become something real. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Vivien. He hadn't planned to voice the possibility that their marriage might evolve beyond its contractual boundaries, but the admission felt honest in a way that careful emotional distance hadn't. Something real, Vivien repeated softly. What would that look like? I don't know yet. But I think it might start with stopping the pretense that we're just business partners who happen to share a house. That evening, as Pine Haven settled into its familiar quiet rhythms, Mark stood at his bedroom window, looking out over the lake. Somewhere in the house, Lily practiced piano while Vivien reviewed business documents. The sounds of his new family filled spaces that had been empty for decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, community scrutiny, the ongoing navigation of their unusual relationship, the gradual adaptation to circumstances none of them had imagined 6 months ago. But tonight, for the first time since Sarah's death, Mark felt like he might be building something rather than simply surviving something. The marriage contract in Vivien's safe specified 1 year, but Mark was beginning to suspect that the heart operated on a different timeline entirely. The Pine Haven Community Foundation Gala transformed the town's modest event center into something approaching elegance. String lights draped from the ceiling, round tables adorned with centerpieces of local wildflowers, and a small orchestra positioned near a dance floor that would see limited use among Pine Haven's practical residents. Mark adjusted his rented tuxedo one final time as their car approached the venue, acutely aware of Vivien's nervous energy beside him. She looked stunning in a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her silver hair swept into an elegant updo that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. But Mark noticed the way her left hand trembled slightly as she checked her appearance in her compact mirror, a subtle reminder of the medical reality underlying their evening's performance. Ready? Vivien asked as their driver opened the door. As ready as I'll ever be for my debut as a society husband, Mark replied, earning a genuine smile that eased some of the tension in her shoulders. The moment they entered the venue, Mark felt the subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that accompanied their arrival. Conversations paused just long enough for curious glances, then resumed with the slightly forced enthusiasm of people pretending they hadn't been speculating about the newcomers. Vivian Carlisle, Margaret Patterson, Pine Haven's self-appointed social coordinator, descended upon them with the determination of a woman who'd been waiting weeks for this moment. How wonderful to see you again, dear. And this must be your husband. Mark extended his hand with the calm confidence he'd perfected during years of dealing with difficult customers. Mark Ortega. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Patterson. Oh, my goodness, of course. Little Mark from the hardware store. I remember you helping your grandfather during those summer visits. Margaret's eyes sparkled with the delight of someone who just connected long-separated dots. How romantic that you two found each other again after all these years. The conversation that followed established the pattern for their evening gentle probing, disguised as friendly interest, thinly veiled curiosity about their whirlwind courtship, and the underlying assumption that their marriage represented some sort of fairy tale conclusion to childhood friendship. Mark found himself settling into the role more easily than he'd expected. Years of customer service had taught him to project warmth and confidence, even when feeling neither, and Vivien's presence beside him provided steady support. She fielded questions about her business with gracious brevity, deflected inquiries about their future plans with diplomatic skill, and managed to convey genuine affection for Mark without crossing into territory that felt false. You're good at this, Mark murmured during a brief lull between conversations. Survival skill, Vivien replied, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. 40 years of charity galas and corporate events teach you to perform sincerity on demand. Is that what this is? A performance? She paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. I'm not sure anymore. The lines are starting to blur. Before Mark could respond, Tom approached with Eleanor Henderson on his arm, both of them looking slightly uncomfortable in formal wear, but determined to show support for Mark's new circumstances. Well, look at you two, Eleanor said, beaming with grandmotherly pride. Don't you make a handsome couple? Mrs. Henderson insisted we come show our support, Tom added with a grin. Couldn't let you face the Pine Haven social elite without backup. The easy banter with his oldest friends helped Mark relax into the evening's rhythms. He danced with Vivien when the orchestra played slow songs, her body warm and familiar against his, despite the careful boundaries they maintained at home. He chatted with former customers about business and weather and local politics, gradually realizing that most people seemed genuinely happy for his unexpected good fortune. But it was during dinner that the evening took an unexpected turn. Judge Peterson, who had officiated their wedding, raised his wine glass and requested attention from the assembled guests. Friends, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge something special happening in our community, Peterson began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. As many of you know, Vivian Carlisle has returned home to Pine Haven after building one of the most successful businesses in the state. But more importantly, she's chosen to invest her resources in our community's future. Mark glanced at Vivien, noting her slight frown of confusion. Some of you may not be aware that Mrs. Carlisle has quietly funded the renovation of our elementary school's music program, established a scholarship fund for local students pursuing higher education, and committed to a 3-year revitalization project for Pine Haven's downtown district. The room erupted in spontaneous applause, and Mark felt Vivien stiffen beside him. Her expression remained graciously composed, but he sensed her discomfort with the public recognition. Furthermore, Peterson continued, her marriage to Mark Ortega represents something profound about the enduring connections that bind our community together. Sometimes the best things in life circle back to where they began. As the applause swelled again, Mark reached for Vivien's hand beneath the table, offering silent support. Her fingers intertwined with his, and he felt a slight tremor that had nothing to do with Parkinson's symptoms. After dinner, they escaped to the event center's small balcony that overlooked Pine Haven's darkened lake. The evening air carried the crisp promise of autumn, and distant lights reflected off the water like scattered stars. You didn't tell me about the donations, Mark said quietly. I didn't want you to feel like charity by association. Vivien leaned against the balcony railing, her elegant gown stark against the night sky. The truth is, I've been funding community projects for months long before I approached you about marriage. How long? Since I decided to move back. Maybe. Longer. She was quiet for a moment, then continued. I've been watching Pine Haven struggle for years, Mark. Watching businesses close, young people move away, the gradual decline of a place that once meant everything to me. Money can't fix every problem, but it can fix some of them. Mark studied her profile in the moonlight, beginning to understand the depth of her connection to their small town. This isn't just about coming home to die, is it? You're trying to save Pine Haven. I'm trying to give something back to the place that shaped who I am. Before the money, before the success, I was just a lonely girl who found magic in a small lakeside town where people knew each other's names and cared about each other's struggles. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Mark was only beginning to process. And the marriage? Where does that fit into your grand plan? Vivien turned to face him fully, her expression vulnerable in the dim light. The marriage was supposed to be separate personal insurance against dying alone. But being here with you tonight, seeing how naturally you fit into my vision for Pine Haven's future. She paused, seeming to struggle with words. I think I may have underestimated what I was asking for. In what way? I thought I was hiring a companion for my final years. I didn't expect to start caring about whether you could be happy with someone like me. The honesty in her voice made Mark's chest tighten. Over the past weeks, he'd watched Vivien reveal layers of herself that the business world never saw: her gentleness with Lily, her quiet generosity toward their community, her vulnerability in the face of her medical prognosis. The woman behind the corporate facade was far more complex and appealing than he'd anticipated. Someone like you, Mark repeated. You mean successful? Intelligent? Generous? Dying of an incurable disease? Which part exactly am I supposed to find objectionable? All of it. The money makes me suspect. The success makes me intimidating. The generosity makes me seem calculating. And the disease makes me a poor long-term investment. Mark stepped closer, close enough to see the genuine uncertainty in her eyes. Or maybe the money gives you freedom to be generous. The success proves your intelligence and determination. The generosity shows your character. And the disease makes every moment we have more precious than we might otherwise appreciate. Is that how you see me? I'm starting to. The admission surprised him with its honesty. The question is whether you're brave enough to let me keep looking. Before Vivien could respond, the balcony door opened and Lily appeared, still dressed. In the navy blue dress she'd worn as their unofficial flower girl at the wedding, Mrs. Henderson had brought her to the gala's conclusion, and she bounced toward them with barely contained excitement. "Dad, Vivien!" "Mrs. Peterson said the whole town is talking about what a perfect couple you make." Lily wrapped her arms around both of them simultaneously, creating an involuntary group embrace. She said it proves that true love always finds a way. Mark met Vivian's eyes over Lily's head, seeing his own complex emotions reflected in her expression. True love, the phrase hung in the air between them, simultaneously premature and surprisingly accurate. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Vivien asked, gently. "Do we seem like true love to you?" Lily pulled back to study them both with the serious consideration she brought to difficult piano pieces. "I think you make each other braver," she said finally. "And you both make me feel safe. Isn't that what love is supposed to do?" On the drive home through Pine Haven's quiet streets, the three of them settled into comfortable silence. Lily dozed against Vivian's shoulder, while Mark processed the evening's revelations. His wife, and she was his wife, whatever the contractual. Circumstances had spent months planning not just their marriage, but an entire strategy for community renewal. She'd created a future that included not just her own needs, but the welfare of everyone around her. Back at the Carlisle estate, they helped Lily prepare for bed before retreating to their respective suites. But as Mark reached his door, Vivian's voice stopped him. "Mark, thank you for tonight, for making it feel real instead of performed." He turned to find her standing in the hallway, her expensive gown replaced by a simple robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, somehow more like the girl he'd known 40 years ago. "Maybe it was real," he said quietly. "Maybe we've been performing a life that was actually happening all along." The next morning brought their first crisis as a family. Mark woke to find Vivien sitting at the kitchen table, her medication box open before her and her hands shaking. More noticeably than usual, she was staring at a letter from her neurologist's office, her face pale with controlled anxiety. "What is it?" Mark asked, settling beside her with coffee he'd prepared out of newly developed habit. "Dr. Martinez wants to move up my next appointment. Apparently, some of my recent test results warrant closer monitoring." Vivian's voice remained steady, but Mark detected the fear she was working to suppress. "What kind of monitoring?" "The progression may be accelerating. There are new treatment options to consider, but they come with their own complications." She folded the letter carefully, her movements precise despite the tremor in her fingers. "The timeline we discussed might be optimistic." Mark reached for her hands, stilling their movement with gentle pressure. "Then we adjust. We take whatever time we have and make it count." The question carried hope and disbelief in equal measure. "We, you, me, and Lily. Whatever comes next, we face it together." For the first time since their marriage began, Vivien allowed herself to lean into his support, her head resting against his shoulder as morning light filled the kitchen of their impossible family's new home. Mark discovered the private investigator's report by accident, tucked inside a folder of medical documents that Vivien had asked him to retrieve from her home office. The manila envelope bore the letterhead of Steinberg Investigations and was marked with a date from 6 months before their first meeting at the hardware store. His name appeared on the first page, followed by Lily's, and then a comprehensive dossier that made his blood run cold. Financial records showing his mounting debts, medical bills from Sarah's cancer treatment, school reports about Lily's exceptional musical abilities, even photographs of their daily routines, Lily getting on the school bus, Mark locking up the hardware store, both of them walking to Sarah's grave on Sunday afternoons. The investigation had been thorough and invasive, documenting every aspect of their struggle in life with clinical precision. Grocery store receipts showing careful budgeting, utility bills marked past due, records of Mark's inquiries about additional loans, all of it cataloged, like evidence in a case he hadn't known was being built. But it was the final section that stole his breath entirely. Bank records showing anonymous payments of several overdue bills, the electric company, the water department, even a partial mortgage payment that had kept them from foreclosure during the worst month after Sarah's death. All traced back to accounts controlled by Carlisle Enterprises. Vivien had been managing his financial crisis from the shadows for months. Before approaching him with her marriage proposal, Mark's hands shook as he read the investigator's summary. Subject demonstrates exceptional character under extreme financial pressure, prioritizes daughter's welfare above personal comfort, maintains dignity and work ethic despite impossible circumstances. Recommended as suitable candidate for client's objectives. Suitable candidate. The phrase hit like a physical blow, reducing his entire life to a screening process for Vivien's convenience. The office door opened behind him, and Vivien entered carrying a tea service, her face brightening when she saw him. "Did you find the medical files? Dr. Martinez wants to review." She stopped abruptly, noticing the investigator's report spread across her desk. 6 months, Mark said quietly, not looking up from the documents. "You've been watching us for 6 months." Vivien set down the tea service with careful precision, her composure cracking around the edges. "Mark, I can explain. Can you? Because this looks pretty self-explanatory." He held up a photograph of himself and Lily at the grocery store, studying prices before making selections. "You investigated us like we were a potential business acquisition." "It wasn't like that, no." Mark's voice hardened as months have suppressed. Suspicion crystallized into anger. "Then explain these anonymous payments. Explain why you were secretly solving our financial problems while pretending our meeting was coincidental." Vivien moved around the desk, her hands reaching toward him before falling back to her sides. "I needed to know if you were the person I remembered. If your character had survived the hardships you'd faced, so you hired someone to spy on us." "I hired someone to verify what I hoped was true." Her voice carried desperate urgency. "Mark, I've been burned by people who wanted my money, who saw my wealth as an opportunity to exploit. I couldn't risk. What? That I might actually need help?" Mark stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "That I might be genuinely desperate enough to accept your proposal for real reasons instead of calculated ones?" "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Mark gathered the scattered documents, his movements sharp with betrayal. "You checked my credit rating, Vivien. You documented my daughter's eating habits. You paid our bills without permission and then acted surprised when I was grateful for your proposal." Vivien's composure finally crumbled, tears gathering in her eyes. "I was terrified, Mark. Terrified of dying alone. Terrified of choosing the wrong person. Terrified of being rejected by someone I actually cared about. The investigation was supposed to give me confidence to approach you. And the anonymous payments? I couldn't watch you struggle when I had the means to help. The bills were small amounts to me, but critical to you. I hoped that helping secretly was better than not helping at all." Mark stared at her, processing the implications of her admission. You manipulated our entire relationship. You solved problems I didn't know you knew about, then appeared with a solution that seemed heaven-sent. How am I supposed to trust anything about this marriage? Because despite the investigation, despite the careful planning, everything I've felt for you has been real. Vivian's voice broke on the last word. I may have orchestrated our reunion, but I couldn't orchestrate falling in love with you. The admission hung in the air between them, like a bridge Mark wasn't sure he could cross. Love, the word neither of them had dared to voice, spoken now in the context of betrayal and manipulation. Love, Mark repeated bitterly. Is that what you call this? Paying someone to document my life and presenting yourself as my salvation? I call it the actions of a woman who is desperate enough to risk everything for a chance at genuine connection. Vivien stepped closer, her eyes pleading. Mark, I know how this looks. I know I should have told you from the beginning, but I was terrified that if you knew the extent of my knowledge about your situation, you'd see me as just another wealthy person trying to buy what I wanted. Because that's exactly what you did. No. The word came out fierce, certain. What I did was fall in love with a man from a distance, and try to create circumstances where he might fall in love with me, too. It was cowardly and manipulative and wrong, but it came from love, not calculation. Mark moved to the window that overlooked Pine Haven's lake, his reflection ghost-like in the afternoon light. Behind him, he could hear Vivian's quiet breathing, the subtle sounds of someone trying not to cry. The worst part, he said finally, is that I was starting to believe this could be real. That maybe we could build something genuine out of our strange arrangement. We can. We have been. Have we? Or have I been playing a role in a story you wrote before I ever knew I was part of it? Mark, please look at me. He turned, seeing her vulnerability displayed without defense or pretense. The woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated. $1 million deals stood before him like a child confessing a terrible mistake. I made a choice, Vivien said slowly, to investigate you before approaching you with my proposal. That choice was born from fear and past betrayals, but it was still wrong. I violated your privacy and manipulated circumstances to achieve what I wanted. Yes, you did. But everything that's happened since our marriage, every conversation, every shared meal, every moment watching you with Lily, that's been real. My feelings for you, my gratitude for the family we've become, my hope that we might have a future together, none of that was planned or purchased or manipulated. Mark studied her face, looking for signs of deception or calculated appeal. Instead, he saw raw honesty and the kind of vulnerability that couldn't be faked. How do I know what's real and what's part of your original plan? Because the original plan was a business arrangement that would end after 1 year. What I want now is a marriage that lasts whatever time I have left. Vivian's voice strengthened with certainty. The investigation told me you were a good man, facing impossible circumstances. Living with you has shown me you're an extraordinary man worthy of being loved completely. Before Mark could respond, Lily's voice echoed through the house, calling for both of them. She'd returned from school, with news about an upcoming piano recital, her excitement carrying clearly from the front hall. Dad? Vivien? Where is everyone? Mark and Vivien looked at each other, the weight of their confrontation complicated by the immediate need to maintain normalcy for Lily's sake. We're in the office, sweetheart, Vivien called, her voice carefully modulated to hide any trace of their emotional turmoil. Lily appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder and sheet music clutched in her free hand. Her smile faltered as she noticed the tension radiating between the adults. Is everything okay? Mark and Vivien exchanged a look that carried the weight of their unresolved conflict and their shared commitment to protecting Lily from their adult complications. Everything's fine, Mark said, forcing warmth into his voice. Vivien and I were just discussing some business matters. Tell us about your day. As Lily launched into an enthusiastic description of her piano lesson and the upcoming recital opportunity, Mark found himself watching Vivian's reactions. Her attention to Lily remained genuine and focused, her interest in his daughter's achievements undiminished by their personal crisis. Later that evening, after Lily had practiced piano and completed her homework, Mark found Vivien on the estate's back terrace, looking out over the darkened lake. She'd changed from her business attire into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders in a style that made her look younger and more approachable. "She has a recital next month," Vivien said without turning around. "Mrs. Crawford thinks she's ready for a competition-level piece. She's excited about it. She trusts us to be there for her. Both of us." Vivien's voice carried quiet pain. "I don't want our problems to affect her sense of security." Mark joined her at the terrace railing, maintaining careful distance while they talked. "Neither do I, but I also don't want to model a relationship built on deception." "Then help me figure out how to rebuild what I damaged." Vivien turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. "Mark, I can't change what I did. I can't take back the investigation or the anonymous payments or the way I manipulated our first meeting. But I can promise you that from this moment forward, everything between us will be honest. How can I believe that when the foundation of our entire relationship was built on lies? Because the foundation of our relationship isn't the marriage contract or my proposal or even the money. It's the way you make me laugh when I'm scared about my diagnosis. It's the way I feel useful when I help Lily with her homework. It's the family dinners where we all forget to be careful around each other." Mark considered her words, weighing them against his anger and sense of betrayal. "You investigated my daughter, Vivien. You documented her vulnerabilities like she was a subject in an experiment. I documented her extraordinary talent and her father's dedication to nurturing it despite impossible circumstances. I saw a little girl who deserved every opportunity and a man who would do anything to provide them." Vivien's voice intensified with conviction. "What I found wasn't weakness to exploit, it was strength to admire." Mark felt some of his anger beginning to shift, though the hurt remained sharp and immediate. "But you still used that information to craft an approach designed to get what you wanted." "Yes, I did, and I'm ashamed of that." Vivien's admission was quiet but clear. "I'm ashamed of letting fear drive me to invade your privacy. I'm ashamed of paying your bills without permission. I'm ashamed of pretending our meeting was coincidental when I'd been planning it for months." "Then why did you do it?" "Because I was dying alone, Mark. Not just physically, but emotionally. I'd built an empire, but lost myself in the process. When I started thinking about returning to Pine Haven, I remembered the boy who'd been kind to the awkward rich girl during those summer visits. I wondered if that boy had grown into the kind of man who might see past my money to who I actually am." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "The investigation was supposed to answer that question. Instead, it made me fall in love with the life you'd built, the father you'd become, the man who measured success by his daughter's happiness rather than his bank balance. So you decided to buy your way into that life. I decided to offer you a trade that might benefit both of us. But somewhere between the proposal and the wedding, it stopped being about what I could get from you and started being about what we could build together." Mark stared out at the lake, its surface reflecting stars that seemed impossibly distant. "The anonymous payments, when did they start?" "After your wife died. I'd been following Pine Haven's local news online, and I saw Sarah's obituary. I remembered you from childhood, wondered how you were managing. The investigation started as simple curiosity, but became something more when I realized how much you were struggling. 3 years. You've been watching us for 3 years. Watching and occasionally helping from a distance, yes. But Mark, I never intended to approach you until my diagnosis forced me to confront my own mortality. The marriage proposal wasn't Part of some long-term plan, it was desperation disguised as opportunity. The admission carried a weight of loneliness that made Mark's chest tighten despite his anger. And now? What is it now? Now it's the best decision I've ever made, even if I made it for partially wrong reasons. Vivian's voice strengthened with certainty. Living with you and Lily these past weeks has shown me what I've been missing my entire adult life. Not just companionship, but family. Not just security, but love. Love, Mark repeated, the word feeling foreign in the context of their situation. I love you, Mark. I love your integrity, your dedication to Lily, your quiet strength, the way you make our house feel like a home instead of just an expensive building. I love the man you are and the father you've become and the husband you're learning to be. The declaration hung between them, honest and vulnerable, and terrifying in its implications. Mark turned to study her face in the moonlight, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated appeal. Instead, he saw the raw honesty of someone who'd risked everything on a confession she might not survive. How do I separate what's real from what's manufactured? He asked quietly. By trusting what you feel instead of focusing on how it started. Vivien stepped closer, close enough that he could see tears gathering in her eyes. Mark, I know I've damaged your trust. I know you have every right to end this marriage and take the money and build a life that doesn't include someone who deceived you. But before you make that decision, I need you to know that loving you wasn't part of my plan. What was part of your plan? A business arrangement with a good man who might tolerate my company for a year. Someone who would help me die with dignity instead of alone. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't plan to find someone I couldn't imagine living without. Mark felt his anger wavering in the face of her vulnerability. The woman standing before him wasn't the calculating businesswoman who'd orchestrated their meeting. She was someone frightened and alone, and brave enough to risk everything on the possibility of genuine connection. I need time, he said finally. Time to process this, to figure out what's real and what I can trust. How much time? I don't know. But Vivien, he paused, choosing his words carefully. The anonymous payments. Stop now. If you want to help with Lily's expenses or household costs, we discuss it openly. No more managing my life from behind the scenes. Agreed. Complete transparency from now on. And I need to understand your medical situation without filters or protection. If we're going to face this together, I need to know exactly what we're facing. Vivien nodded, though he could see the fear the honesty would require. Dr. Martinez has been softening the timeline to protect my emotional state. The progression is moving faster than I initially told you. How much faster? Possibly 2 to 3 years before significant limitations. Maybe less if the current treatments stop being effective. The revised timeline hit Mark like a physical blow. 2 to 3 years barely long enough to see Lily through middle school, let alone high school graduation. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid you'd see me as a burden rather than a partner. Because I wanted whatever time we had to be about living, not about dying. Vivian's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been carrying the knowledge alone. Because I was selfish enough to want to be loved for who I am now, not pitied for what I'm becoming. Mark reached for her hands, noting the slight tremor that had become more pronounced in recent weeks. I don't pity you, Vivien. I'm angry with you and hurt by your deception, but I don't pity you. What do you feel? Mark considered the question seriously, sorting through the complex emotions their confrontation had unleashed. I feel betrayed by your methods, but moved by your motives. I feel manipulated by your approach, but impressed by your honesty once confronted. I feel angry about the investigation, but grateful for the life you've made possible for Lily. And about us? About the possibility of an us? I feel terrified, Mark admitted. Terrified of loving someone I'm going to lose. Terrified of building a life that has an expiration date. terrified of making promises I might not be able to keep, but also hopeful. Despite everything, also hopeful. They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of their conversation settling between them like sediment in still water. Around them, Pine Haven's night sounds provided a familiar soundtrack, distant laughter from the town's single bar, the gentle lap of waves against the shore, the whisper of wind through trees that had witnessed decades of human drama. "There's something else," Vivien said finally. "Something the investigation revealed that you need to know." Mark tensed, preparing for another revelation. "Your daughter is extraordinary, Mark. Not just talented, but genuinely gifted in ways that could take her anywhere she wants to go. The payments I made weren't charity. They were investment in someone who has the potential to change the world through music." "You investigated a 10-year-old girl's potential career prospects?" "I researched what opportunities existed for someone with her abilities, and what resources would be required to access them. What I found convinced me that helping your family wasn't just the right thing to do, it was a privilege." Mark thought about Lily's obvious joy when she played piano, the way her entire being seemed to transform when music flowed through her small hands. "And if I decide I can't trust you, if I take the money and end the marriage, then I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I found the perfect family and lost them through my own fear and foolishness." Vivian's voice carried quiet resignation. "But I'll also spend it knowing that Lily has the resources to pursue her dreams, regardless of what happens between us." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the terrace door opening. Lily appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes and looking concerned. "I heard voices," she said, padding barefoot across the stone terrace. "Is everything okay?" Mark and Vivien exchanged a look that carried the weight of their unresolved conflict and their shared commitment to protecting her sense of security. "We were just talking about grown-up things," Mark said, opening his arms as Lily approached. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Are you fighting?" Lily's perception cut through their careful reassurances. "You both look sad." Vivien knelt to Lily's, eye level, her expression gentle, despite the emotional turmoil she was managing. "Sometimes adults have to work through complicated feelings, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean anything will change for you. Promise?" Mark felt the weight of that simple word promise, knowing that his decision about their marriage would determine whether he could keep it. "We promise that whatever happens, you'll always be loved and taken care of." Lily studied both their faces with the serious attention she brought to difficult piano pieces. "I think you should forgive each other," she said finally, "because being angry makes everyone sad, and being sad makes beautiful things harder to see." After tucking Lily back into bed, Mark and Vivien returned to the terrace, both of them processing their daughter's inadvertent wisdom. "She's right," Vivien said quietly. "Being angry does make beautiful things harder to see. Are you saying I should just forgive and forget?" "I'm saying that maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about choosing to see the whole truth instead of just the parts that hurt." Mark considered this, weighing the pain of betrayal against the reality of their shared life, the evidence of deception against the possibility of genuine love. "The whole truth," he said slowly, "is that you manipulated our meeting and invaded our privacy and made decisions about our lives without our consent." "Yes. But the whole truth is also that you've given Lily opportunities she never could have had otherwise, helped our community in ways that will last long after you're gone, and offered me a partnership I never expected to find again." "Yes. And the whole truth is that despite your methods, despite the investigation and the anonymous payments and the carefully orchestrated proposal, what we've built together feels real. It is real, Mark. Whatever else was artificial about how we started, what we've become is absolutely real." Mark stepped closer, close enough to see the hope and fear warring in her expression. "Then we move forward with complete honesty. No more secrets, no more managing situations from behind the scenes, no more trying to protect me from difficult truths. Complete honesty, Vivien agreed. Even when it's uncomfortable or frightening. Especially then. For the first time since discovering the investigation report, Mark felt some of the tension in his chest begin to ease. The betrayal still stung. The hurt would take time to heal. But underneath the pain lay something stronger. The recognition that their unusual family was worth fighting for. "I have a confession of my own," Mark said. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you walked into my hardware store. Not because of the money or the proposal or the opportunities you've provided, but because of who you are. And you think nobody's watching. Who am I when nobody's watching? Someone who cries during Lily's piano practice because the music moves you. Someone who learns the names of everyone in town because you genuinely care about their lives. Someone who faces a terminal diagnosis with courage I can barely comprehend." Mark reached for her hands, no longer caring about the slight tremor in her fingers. "Someone worth loving, even if loving you means losing you." The tears Vivien had been holding back finally spilled over, and Mark found himself pulling her into his arms, holding her against his chest while she cried for the relief of being known and accepted and forgiven. "I love you too," she whispered against his shirt. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," Mark replied, surprising them both. "Being terrified means we have something worth protecting." They held each other on the terrace overlooking Pine Haven's peaceful lake, two people who had found each other through deception and manipulation, but chose to stay together through honesty and love. The investigation report that had threatened to destroy their marriage lay forgotten in Vivien's office, superseded by the more powerful evidence of what they built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ongoing navigation of Vivien's medical condition, the complex dynamics of their unconventional family, the delicate balance between accepting help and maintaining independence. But tonight, for the first time since their marriage began, Mark and Vivien allowed themselves to believe that love might be stronger than the circumstances that created it. 3 weeks after their confrontation over the investigation report, Mark and Vivien had settled into a new rhythm of deliberate honesty that felt both fragile and powerful. They discussed Vivien's medical appointments openly, shared household decisions without hidden agendas, and gradually rebuilt trust through small acts of transparency. But it was Lily's announcement over breakfast that would test the rebuilt foundation in ways they hadn't anticipated. "Mrs. Crawford wants me to audition for the State Youth Conservatory," Lily said, her fork paused halfway to her mouth, eyes bright with excitement and nervousness. "She thinks I'm ready for their summer intensive program." Mark set down his coffee cup, processing the implications. The State Youth Conservatory represented the pinnacle of musical education for young talents, a pathway to scholarships, advanced instruction, and connections that could shape an entire career. It was also notoriously competitive and expensive, the kind of opportunity he dreamed about but never dared to plan for. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Vivien said, her voice warm with genuine enthusiasm. "Tell us more about the program." "It's 6 weeks during the summer, working with professional musicians and other kids who are serious about music. Mrs. Crawford says only about 20 students get accepted from the entire state." Lily's words tumbled over each other in her excitement. "But the audition is really hard. I'd have to perform 3 pieces, 1 classical, 1 modern, and 1 of my own choosing, in front of a panel of judges." Mark felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied opportunities that seemed simultaneously wonderful and impossible. "When is the audition?" "Next month." "But Dad," Lily's expression grew uncertain. "Mrs. Crawford says I need more intensive preparation, like working with a professional coach, not just regular lessons. Someone who understands competition level. Performance. How much more intensive?" Vivien asked, and Mark appreciated that she didn't immediately offer to solve the problem with money. "A few hours a week with someone who's worked with conservatory students before. Mrs. Crawford knows a teacher in the city who might take me on." But Lily looked between her father and stepmother with the careful expression of a child who understood adult financial limitations. It's expensive, and if I don't get accepted to the program, it would all be for nothing. The conversation continued over breakfast, but Mark found his attention splitting between Lily's excitement and his own complex emotions. 6 months ago, an opportunity like this would have been impossible, beyond his financial reach, and therefore beyond consideration. Now, thanks to Vivian's $1 million marriage arrangement, the cost was manageable. But accepting help still felt like surrendering some essential part of his identity as Lily's provider. After Lily left for school, Mark and Vivien cleaned up the breakfast dishes in the comfortable silence they'd developed for processing important conversations. "She's ready for this," Vivien said finally, rinsing plates with careful attention to the task. "I've been listening to her practice for weeks now, and there's something different about her playing lately. More mature, more confident." "I know." Mark dried the dishes as she washed them, their movements synchronized through domestic routine. "That's what makes this so difficult. The money, the dependence." Mark set a plate in the cabinet, choosing his words carefully. "For 8 years, I've measured my success as a father by my ability to provide for Lily's needs. Accepting help even from my wife feels like admitting I'm not enough." Vivien turned off the water and faced him fully, soap suds still clinging to her hands. "Mark, can I tell you something about success that took me 20 years to learn?" He nodded, noting the slight tremor in her left hand that had become more pronounced in recent weeks. "Success isn't about doing everything alone. It's about recognizing when collaboration makes everyone stronger. Some of my biggest business victories came from partnerships, where I contributed what I did best and trusted others to contribute what they did best." She dried her hands with deliberate movements, the tremor making the simple task require more concentration. "Lily needs this opportunity, and we have the resources to provide it. That's not dependence, that's family." "And what happens if—" Mark stopped himself, unwilling to voice the thought that had been haunting him since Dr. Martinez's latest report. "If I die before she graduates from high school? If my condition deteriorates faster than we're planning for? If you're left to manage everything alone again?" Vivian's tone remained calm, but Mark saw the fear she was working to suppress. "Then, at least we'll have given her the strongest possible foundation to build on." Before Mark could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Need to talk. Coffee at the diner, when you can manage it." An hour later, Mark sat across from his oldest friend in the familiar booth, where they'd shared countless conversations over the years. Tom looked uncharacteristically serious, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had grown cold, while he gathered his thoughts. "I've been hearing things," Tom said without preamble. "About your wife, about the marriage, about money changing hands." Mark felt his shoulders tense. "What kind of things?" "People are starting to ask questions, Mark, about how you went from struggling to pay bills to living in the biggest house in Pine Haven, about whether Vivian's generosity comes with strings that might not be in your best interest. People need to mind their own business. Maybe. But when those people include the folks who've known you your entire life, their concerns might be worth hearing." Tom leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not saying they're right, but I am saying that appearances matter in a town this size." Mark thought about the anonymous payments Vivien had made, the investigation report, the complex reality of their relationship that defied simple explanation. What exactly are people saying? That you're being used? That a rich woman showed up, threw money at your problems, and now you're trapped in a situation you can't get out of without losing everything? Tom's voice gentled. "They're worried. About you, Mark, and about Lily. Lily is thriving. She's happier than she's been since Sarah died. I know that. I can see it every time I talk to her. But perception and reality don't always align, and in a small town, perception can become its own kind of reality." Mark considered this, understanding the underlying truth of Tom's concern. Pine Haven operated on intricate networks of relationship and reputation, and his sudden change in circumstances had inevitably generated speculation. "What would you do?" Mark asked, "if you were in my position?" "I'd probably do exactly what you're doing, put my daughter's welfare first, and let people think whatever they want to think." Tom's expression softened. "But I'd also make sure I wasn't losing myself in the process." "You've always been independent, Mark. Don't let money, even money that solves real problems, turn you into someone you don't recognize." That evening, Mark found Vivien in the music room, sitting quietly while Lily practiced the pieces Mrs. Crawford had suggested for her conservatory audition. The sound of Chopin filled the space with liquid beauty, and Mark paused in the doorway to watch his wife's face as she listened. Vivien's expression held a mixture of wonder and sadness that made Mark's chest tighten. She was watching Lily with the focused attention of someone storing up memories against an uncertain future, and the visible tremor in her hands seemed more pronounced in the lamplight after Lily finished practicing and went upstairs to complete her homework. Mark and Vivien remained in the music room, surrounded by the lingering echoes of beautiful sound. "She's ready," Vivien said quietly, "for the audition, for the conservatory, for whatever opportunities her talent can create. And we're ready to help her pursue them. Are we?" Vivien turned to face him, her expression uncertain. "Mark, I had another appointment with Dr. Martinez today. The progression is accelerating faster than we initially projected." Mark felt the familiar cold grip of fear. "How much faster?" "The medications are becoming less effective. She wants to try a new treatment protocol, but it's more aggressive and comes with significant side effects." Vivien's voice remained steady, but Mark could see the effort the composure required. "We're looking at maybe 18 months of relative stability, possibly less." 18 months. The number hung between them like a countdown clock, marking the probable boundaries of their shared future. Mark did quick mental calculations. Lily would be 12, still in middle school, still needing guidance and support through the complicated transition to adolescence. What does that mean for us? For Lily? It means we need to make decisions now about her long-term future. It means setting up support systems that will survive my illness. It means Vivien's voice broke slightly. It means making sure she's prepared for another loss. Mark moved to sit beside her on the piano bench, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. "We'll figure it out. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Will we?" The question carried a weight of vulnerability that made Mark's heart ache. "Mark, I need to know that if my condition deteriorates rapidly, you won't sacrifice your own life to take care of me. Lily needs a father who's present and engaged, not someone consumed by caregiver responsibilities. You're asking me to promise to abandon you if things get difficult. I'm asking you to promise to prioritize the living over the dying." Vivien's eyes held his steadily. "I've seen what extended illness can do to families, Mark. I won't let my disease destroy what we've built together. And I won't let fear of what might happen prevent us from living fully now." Mark brought her hands to his lips, kissing the palms that trembled despite her efforts to control them. "We focus on today, on this week, on giving Lily the audition. Preparation she needs, the future will sort itself out. The audition coach Mrs. Crawford recommended her name is Elena Vasquez. She's worked with several students who've been accepted to the conservatory program." Vivien pulled a folder from the side table, her movements careful but determined. "I took the liberty of researching her background and availability." Mark accepted the folder, noting the thoroughness of Vivien's research academic credentials, student success rates, teaching philosophy, even testimonials from parents whose children had worked with her. "You did all this today?" "I did it because Lily deserves the best possible preparation, and because focusing on her future helps me avoid obsessing about my own limitations." Vivien's honesty was characteristic of their new commitment to transparency. "I hope that's okay." "More than okay." It's exactly what a good stepmother would do. Is that what I am? A good stepmother? Mark studied her face, the elegant features. It marked her success, the vulnerability that revealed her humanity, the love for Lily that had grown genuine and deep over their months together. You're the stepmother Lily deserves, and the wife I never expected to find again. He closed the folder and set it aside, focusing entirely on the woman beside him. Whatever time we have, Vivien, I want to spend it being married to you, not just living under the same roof. What does that mean? It means I love you. Completely, honestly, without reservation. The admission came easier than Mark had expected, carrying the weight of certainty rather than fear. It means that 18 months or 18 years, whatever, we get, I want to live it as your husband. Vivian's response was wordless tears flowing freely as she leaned into his embrace, her body trembling with emotion rather than medical symptoms. They held each other in the music room, where Lily's dreams were taking shape, surrounded by instruments that would outlast them all, and melodies that would echo in their daughter's memory long after they were gone. I love you too, Vivien whispered, against his shoulder. I love you so much it scares me. Good, Mark replied, echoing his words from weeks earlier. Being scared means we have something precious to lose. They spent the rest of the evening planning Lily's audition preparation scheduling sessions with Elena Vasquez, selecting repertoire that would showcase her range and maturity, discussing logistics that would minimize disruption to her regular schooling. The conversation was practical and forward-looking, focused on building opportunities rather than dwelling on limitations. But underneath their planning lay the unspoken awareness that they were racing against time, not just Vivian's declining health, but the precious, unrepeatable childhood of a girl who deserved to chase her dreams without fear of loss. Later that night, as Pine Haven settled into its familiar quiet rhythms, Mark stood at his bedroom window, looking out over the lake. That had witnessed decades of human hopes and struggles. Somewhere in the house, Lily slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps of conservatory auditions and concert stages. Down the hall, Vivien worked at her laptop, managing business obligations with the same determination she brought to fighting her disease. Months ago, Mark's life had been defined by scarcity, not enough money, not enough time, not enough hope for meaningful change. Now he found himself wealthy in ways he'd never imagined, surrounded by love and opportunity, and the complex responsibilities that came with both. The marriage contract that had brought them together specified 1 year, but Mark was beginning to understand that some commitments transcended legal documents. Whatever happened with Vivian's health, whatever challenges lay ahead for their unusual family, he was no longer the desperate man who'd accepted $1 million proposition. He was a husband, a father, and a man who'd learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased, only received as gifts from those brave enough to love without guarantees. The day of Lily's audition dawned gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself understood the weight of what was at stake. Mark stood at the kitchen window, watching rain streak down the glass while coffee brewed behind him, his stomach tight, with the kind of nervousness that had nothing to do with his own performance and everything to do with watching someone he loved reach for their dreams. Upstairs, he could hear the shower running in Lily's bathroom, followed by the familiar sounds of his 12-year-old daughter preparing for the most important musical performance of her young life. They'd driven to the state capitol the night before, staying in a hotel near the conservatory to avoid morning travel stress. But sleep had been elusive for all three of them, the quiet tension of anticipation making rest nearly impossible. Vivien emerged from her bedroom, already dressed in the elegant navy suit she'd chosen for the occasion, formal enough to show respect for the audition process, but not so ostentatious as to overshadow Lily's moment. Mark noticed immediately that her left hand was tucked into her jacket pocket, hiding the tremor that had become more pronounced in recent weeks. "How are you feeling?" he asked, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Nervous and excited and proud all at once," she replied, settling beside him at the small hotel table. "How are you?" "Terrified." The admission came without filter, honest in the way their relationship had become since the revelation about the investigation report. What if she freezes up? What if the judges don't see what we see? What if... Mark. Vivian's voice carried gentle firmness. "Lily is ready for this. Elena has prepared her beautifully. She knows the material inside and out, and she has a gift that can't be hidden or diminished by one difficult day." Mark nodded, understanding the logic while struggling with the emotional reality of watching his daughter face potential rejection or disappointment. "I know. It's just this feels like such a pivotal moment. Like everything changes depending on what happens today. Everything already changed the moment we decided to give her this opportunity. Win or lose today, Lily knows that the adults in her life believe in her talent enough to invest in its development. That confidence will serve her regardless of the audition outcome." Before Mark could respond, the bathroom door opened and Lily emerged, dressed in the simple black dress they'd chosen together, elegant without being showy, appropriate for a serious musical performance. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with a poise that made her seem older than her 12 years. "I'm ready," she announced, though Mark detected the slight tremor in her voice that matched the one in Vivian's hidden hand. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Vivien said, rising to embrace her stepdaughter. "How do you feel?" "Scared, but also excited." Lily pulled back to look at both adults. "Mrs. Vasquez says that being nervous means you care about doing well. And caring about doing well usually leads to actually doing well." "Wise advice," Mark said, marveling at his daughter's maturity. "Do you have everything you need?" Lily patted the leather portfolio that contained her sheet music, already organized in performance order. All 3 pieces, backup copies, and the lucky pencil Mrs. Crawford gave me for marking fingerings if I need to. The State Youth Conservatory occupied a modern building that managed to feel both impressive and welcoming, its soaring glass atrium filled with the sounds of various instruments being practiced in rehearsal rooms throughout the complex. Mark, Vivien, and Lily joined a small group of young musicians and their families in the main lobby, everyone maintaining the polite tension of people waiting for life-changing evaluations. Lily Ortega, a woman with a clipboard and a warm smile, approached their small group. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chun, and I'll be coordinating your audition today. Are you ready?" Lily nodded, squaring her shoulders with visible determination. "Yes, ma'am." "Wonderful. Your accompanist is already in the audition room, and the panel is ready when you are. Parents, you're welcome to wait here in the lobby. We'll have results for all today's auditioners by 4 o'clock. Mark felt a pang of panic at the thought of letting Lily face this challenge alone, but he forced himself to project calm confidence. "You've got this, kiddo. Trust your preparation and let your talent speak for itself." Vivien hugged Lily gently, whispering something in her ear that made the girl smile before following Dr. Chun down a corridor that led to the audition spaces left alone in the lobby. Mark and Vivien settled into uncomfortable chairs that seemed designed to amplify anxiety, rather than provide comfort. Around them, other families maintained their own vigils, some chatting nervously while others sat in tense silence. "Tell me about the first time you heard her play," Vivien said quietly, clearly attempting to distract them both from the waiting. Mark smiled, remembering. She was 7, and Sarah had just started giving her basic lessons on our old upright piano. "I came home from work one day and heard this melody coming from the living room, nothing complicated, just a simple scale, but there was something about the way she touched the keys. Like she was having a conversation with the instrument instead of just making noise." What did Sarah think? Sarah knew immediately. She called Mrs. Crawford that same week and asked about formal lessons. Mark's voice softened with memory. She said Lily had musicians' hands-long fingers, natural rhythm, the ability to feel music rather than just play it. Sarah sounds like she was a remarkable mother. She was. And she would have been so proud today. Mark paused, processing. The strange reality of sharing this moment with someone who wasn't his daughter's biological mother, but had become genuinely invested in her future. She would have liked you, Vivien. She would have appreciated how much you care about Lily's happiness. I hope so. Because I can't imagine loving her more if she were my own daughter. The admission carried weight. It went beyond the immediate circumstances of the audition. Mark realized that somewhere in the months since their marriage, Vivien had become not just his wife, but Lily's true stepmother, someone whose love and support would continue regardless of what happened between the adults. Not an hour passed with excruciating slowness. Other students emerged from their auditions, with expressions ranging from elated to devastated, their families clustering around them with the careful enthusiasm of people trying to manage hope and disappointment simultaneously. Mr. and Mrs. Ortega? Dr. Chun reappeared in the lobby, her expression professionally neutral. Would you like to come meet with the audition panel? Lily's performances are complete, and they'd like to speak with you. Mark's heart hammered as they followed Dr. Chun through corridors lined with practice rooms, where young musicians worked on scales and etudes. The audition room itself was surprisingly intimate, a small concert space with excellent acoustics and a panel of 3 judges, seated behind a table covered with score sheets and evaluation forms. Lily stood beside the piano, her posture composed, but her eyes bright with the aftermath of performance adrenaline. She smiled when she saw her parents, and Mark felt some of his tension ease at the obvious relief on her face. Mr. and Mrs. Ortega, said the panel chair, a distinguished woman with silver hair and kind eyes. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, director of the conservatory program. Thank you for allowing Lily to audition today. Mark felt Vivian's hand slip into his, her tremor barely noticeable as she squeezed his fingers. Thank you for the opportunity, he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Lily has just delivered 3 remarkable performances. Dr. Morrison continued, glancing at her fellow judges with expressions that seemed positive but remained professionally unreadable. Her technical proficiency is excellent for her age, but more importantly, she demonstrates genuine musical understanding that goes beyond mere execution. Mark looked at his daughter, noting the flush of pride and exhaustion on her face. She'd given everything she had to this audition, and regardless of the outcome, he felt overwhelmed with admiration for her courage. The piece she chose for her personal selection was particularly moving, added the second judge, a younger man with the calloused fingers of a serious pianist. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major is challenging repertoire for someone her age, but she performed it with real, emotional depth. However, Dr. Morrison said, and Mark felt his stomach drop at the qualifying word, we need to discuss some practical considerations about the program structure and whether it would be the best fit for Lily's current developmental needs. Vivian's grip on his hand tightened almost imperceptibly. What kind of considerations? She asked. The intensive program requires students to live on campus for 6 weeks, participating in master classes, ensemble work, and individual instruction, at a very demanding pace. Most of our participants are 14 to 17 years old, and the social dynamics can be challenging for younger students. Mark felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. Are you saying Lily isn't ready for the program? We're saying that Lily's talent is exceptional, but her age presents some complications. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her expression earnest. We'd like to propose an alternative that might serve her better at this stage of her development. What kind of alternative? Lily asked, speaking for the first time since her parents had entered the room. We have a pre-conservatory track for younger students with exceptional promise. It involves monthly weekend intensives throughout the school year, working with the same faculty, but allowing students to remain at home and continue their regular education. The third judge, An elderly woman with gentle hands smiled at Lily. "It's designed for students exactly like you, those who are musically ready for advanced instruction, but not yet ready for the social challenges of residential programs." Mark processed this information, understanding that they were being offered something valuable, even if it wasn't exactly what they'd hoped for. Would this program prepare Lily for the full conservatory track when she's older? Absolutely. In fact, students who complete our pre-conservatory program have a 90% acceptance rate into our summer intensive when they reach appropriate age. Dr. Morrison's enthusiasm was becoming more evident. Lily would be working with the same faculty, learning the same fundamental approaches, just in a format that respects her current developmental stage. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Vivien asked, directing the question to Lily with the respect for her opinion that had characterized their family dynamic from the beginning. Lily considered the offer seriously, her expression thoughtful. "Would I be able to work on the same kind of pieces? The challenging ones that make me feel like I'm really making music instead of just playing notes?" "Definitely," the younger judge replied. "In fact, you'd probably progress faster in the weekend format because you'd have time to practice and internalize what you learn between sessions." "Then I think that sounds perfect," Lily said, her smile genuine and relieved. "I wasn't really looking forward to being away from home for 6 weeks anyway." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering practical details about scheduling, costs, and expectations. Mark found himself impressed by the thoughtfulness of the program, structure, and the genuine care the faculty showed for matching opportunities to individual student needs. As they prepared to leave the audition room, Dr. Morrison addressed Lily directly. "I want you to know that your audition today was truly exceptional. The panel was unanimous in recognizing your talent and potential. This alternative program isn't a consolation prize. It's the beginning of a serious musical education that could take you anywhere you want to go." Walking back to their car through the drizzling afternoon, Mark felt a complex mixture of emotions. Lily chattered excitedly about the weekend intensives and the pieces she'd be able to work on. Her disappointment about not making the summer program clearly overshadowed by excitement about the opportunities she had received. "Are you okay with how things turned out?" Vivien asked quietly as they settled into the car. "More than okay," Mark replied, meaning it completely. "This is better than what we hoped for, actually. Lily gets advanced instruction without the disruption of being away from home for 6 weeks. And we get to keep our family together while she pursues her dreams," Vivien added, her voice carrying relief that Mark understood completely. The drive home to Pine Haven passed quickly, filled with Lily's detailed recounting of her audition experience and excited speculation about her first weekend intensive. By the time they reached the Carlisle estate, the gray afternoon had given way to evening, and the familiar sight of their home felt like a reward for having successfully navigated a challenging day. "Dad, can I call Mrs. Crawford and tell her about the program?" Lily asked as they entered the house. "Of course. She'd be thrilled to hear how well you did." As Lily bounded upstairs to make her phone call, Mark and Vivien found themselves alone in the foyer of their grand house, both of them processing the day's emotional journey. "She was magnificent," Vivien said, settling onto the bottom step of the main staircase. "Watching her perform with such confidence and maturity, I felt like my heart might burst with pride." Mark sat beside her, close enough to notice that her tremor had worsened during the stress of the day. "Are you feeling all right? You seem more shaky than usual." "Stress tends to exacerbate the symptoms," Vivien admitted. "But it was worth it to see Lily succeed. Did you notice how the judges responded to her choppin'? They weren't just evaluating technique. They were genuinely moved by her interpretation. She has something special, doesn't she? Something that goes beyond just being good at piano. She has what Sarah must have had, the ability to find emotional truth in music and share it with others." Vivien leaned against Mark's shoulder and he felt some of the day's tension begin to drain from both of them. And she has what you've given her: the confidence to take risks and the resilience to handle whatever outcomes arise. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to Lily's excited voice drifting down from upstairs as she shared her news with Mrs. Crawford. The house around them felt full of possibility and promise, a dramatic change from the desperate circumstances that had first brought them together. "Mark," Vivien said quietly, "there's something we need to discuss about the weekend intensives." "The cost?" "Because we can absolutely afford." "Not the cost, the timing." Vivian's voice carried a weight that made Mark pay closer attention. "The program runs through the school year, into next summer. By then, my condition may have progressed significantly." Mark felt the familiar cold grip of reality intruding on their moment of celebration. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we need to prepare Lily for the possibility that I might not be able to attend all of her performances or participate in all of her musical milestones." Vivian's honesty was characteristic, but still difficult to hear. "I want to be there for everything, Mark, but I also want to be realistic about what my health might allow. Then we'll adapt. We'll make sure she has the support she needs, whether it's from you, from me, or from the extended family we've built here in Pine Haven." "Promise me something," Vivien said, turning to face him directly. "Promise me that if my condition deteriorates rapidly, you won't sacrifice Lily's opportunities to take care of me. Her musical education needs to continue regardless of what happens with my health." "Vivien, promise me, Mark. I need to know that my illness won't derail the future we've worked so hard to create for her." Mark studied his wife's face, seeing the fear and determination warring in her expression. "I promise that Lily's needs will always come first. But I also promise that we'll face whatever challenges arise together as a family. You don't get to plan your own abandonment, Vivien. We're in this together." Relief flooded her features, and Mark realized that his commitment to their partnership meant as much to her as any practical arrangements for Lily's future. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as worth fighting for, even when fighting becomes difficult. Especially when fighting becomes difficult." Their conversation was interrupted by Lily's return, her face flushed with excitement and gratitude. "Mrs. Crawford says the pre-conservatory program is actually better for my long-term development than the summer intensive would have been," she announced. "And she wants to adjust my regular lessons to help me prepare for the more advanced work." "That sounds perfect," Mark said, pulling his daughter into a hug that encompassed both celebration and relief. "We're proud of you, kiddo, not just for how you performed today, but for how you handled everything: the preparation, the nerves, even the unexpected outcome. And for being brave enough to chase your dreams," Vivien added, joining their embrace with the easy affection that had developed between stepmother and daughter. Today was just the beginning of an amazing musical journey. As they stood together in the foyer of their restored Victorian home, Mark felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the improbable family they'd become. A year ago, he'd been a struggling widower facing financial ruin and limited options for his daughter's future. Now he was a husband again, part of a partnership that had transformed not just their economic circumstances, but their entire approach too. Possibility and hope. The conservatory audition had been successful beyond their expectations, opening doors to opportunities that would shape Lily's musical development for years to come. But more importantly, it had demonstrated something essential about their family's resilience and mutual support, qualities that would serve them well regardless of what challenges lay ahead. 6 months after Lily's conservatory audition, the Carlisle estate hummed with the quiet energy of a family that had learned to live fully in the present while planning carefully for an uncertain future. Mark stood in the kitchen preparing lunch, while listening to Lily practice in the music room, her playing noticeably more sophisticated since beginning the pre-conservatory program. The weekend intensives had indeed proven perfect for her development, providing advanced instruction while allowing her to remain grounded in their Pine Haven life. Vivien sat at the breakfast table, reviewing documents from her latest medical appointment, her left hand now requiring conscious effort to remain steady while she wrote. The progression of her Parkinson's had followed the timeline Dr. Martinez had projected, not catastrophic, but undeniably present in ways that required daily adaptation. The new medication is helping with the motor symptoms, she said, looking up from her notes. But Dr. Martinez wants to discuss long-term care planning at our next appointment. Mark dried his hands and joined her at the table, noting the careful way she held her pen and the slight concentration required for tasks that had once been automatic. What kind of planning? Physical therapy protocols, home modifications we might need, healthcare directives. Vivian's tone remained matter-of-fact. But Mark could see the effort the clinical detachment required. Nothing immediate, but it's responsible to have systems in place. Before Mark could respond, Lily's practice session concluded with a flourish, and she appeared in the kitchen doorway with the satisfied expression of someone who just mastered a particularly challenging passage. "Dad, can Elena come for dinner next weekend? She wants to meet you and Vivien properly. And she says it's important for teachers to understand family dynamics when they're working with serious students." Elena Vasquez had become more than just Lily's weekend instructor over the past months. She'd evolved into something approaching a mentor, someone who understood both Lily's exceptional talent and the complex family circumstances that supported her development. "I'd love to meet her," Vivien said. "Anyone who's contributed so much to her musical growth is welcome at our table any time." "She's going to love this house," Lily continued, settling into her chair with the easy confidence that had grown alongside her musical abilities. "She says musical families often live in interesting places because artists understand that environment affects creativity." Mark exchanged a glance with Vivien, both of them amused by their daughter's casual absorption of adult concepts. Lily had matured significantly over the past year, not just musically, but in her understanding of the world around her. "Speaking of environment," Vivien said, "I have some news that might interest both of you. The Pine Haven Community Foundation has approved funding for a new music program at the elementary school. They want to name it the Sarah Ortega Memorial Music Education Initiative." Mark felt his breath catch. Sarah's name? Judge Peterson suggested it when the foundation was discussing how to honor local residents who'd made significant contributions to the community's cultural life. He remembered that Sarah had been working on her music education degree when she became ill. The gesture touched Mark more deeply than he'd expected. Sarah's dreams of teaching music to children had been cut short by cancer, but her memory would now support other young musicians in Pine Haven for years to come. "Mom would have loved that," Lily said quietly, and Mark noted how naturally she'd begun referring to Sarah as Mom and Vivien as Viviano, distinction that honored both relationships without diminishing either. "She would have," Mark agreed. She always believed that music education was about more than just teaching notes and rhythms. She thought it was about teaching children to express themselves and connect with something beautiful. "The foundation wants to hold a dedication ceremony next month," Vivien continued. "Nothing elaborate, just a community gathering to announce the program and honor Sarah's memory. I thought you might want to speak, if you're comfortable with that." Mark considered the prospect of addressing Pine Haven residents about Sarah's legacy and their family's journey. A year ago, he'd been too consumed with survival to think about public recognition or community honors. Now, with financial security and emotional stability, he felt ready to celebrate his late wife's impact on their daughter's musical development. "I'd be honored to speak," he said. Sarah always believed that individual success was meaningless unless it contributed to something larger. This program would have made her incredibly happy. That evening, after Lily had completed her homework and practiced her pieces for the upcoming weekend intensive, the family settled into their routine of quiet togetherness, Vivien working on business correspondence while managing her symptoms, Mark reviewing hardware store operations that now ran smoothly thanks to the financial stability her support had provided, and Lily reading at the kitchen table where she could be near both. Adults. Dad, Lily said, looking up from her book, can I ask you something kind of serious? Of course. When Vivien gets sicker, not if, I know it's going to happen, will we stay here? In this house, I mean? The question demonstrated Lily's mature understanding of their situation, while revealing the anxiety she'd been carrying about their family's future stability. This is your home, sweetheart, Vivien answered before Mark could respond. Regardless of what happens with my health, this house belongs to our family. The legal documents are already in place to ensure that. But what about taking care of you? Won't that be expensive and complicated? Mark moved to sit beside his daughter, appreciating her concern while wanting to reassure her about adult responsibilities she shouldn't have to carry. Taking care of. Family is what families do, he said gently. Vivien and I have been planning for different scenarios, and we have resources and support systems in place. Your job is to focus on being 12 years old and becoming an amazing musician. But I want to help. When Mom was sick, I felt useless because I was too little to do anything real. Now I'm old enough to be part of the solution. Vivien set aside her laptop, enjoying the conversation fully, her expression thoughtful. What if helping means continuing to be exactly who you are? Bringing music into the house. Sharing what you learn at your weekend intensives. Being the kind of daughter who makes difficult days brighter just by being present? That doesn't feel like enough. It's everything, Mark said firmly. Lily, when your mother was fighting cancer, the thing that kept her going wasn't medical treatments or medications. It was knowing that she was fighting for someone worth fighting for. You gave her reason to hope, and you've been giving me reason to keep building a life worth living ever since she died. And you've given me reason to believe that investing in the future makes sense, even when the future feels uncertain, Vivien added. Watching you grow as a musician and as a person has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. Lily absorbed their words seriously and nodded with the gravity she brought to important decisions. Okay, but when things get harder, I want to know what's happening. Not all the details, but enough to understand how I can help or what I need. To be prepared for. Deal, Mark said, extending his hand for the formal handshake that had become their family's way of sealing important agreements. Deal, Vivien agreed, adding her trembling hand to their small ritual. Later that night, as Pine Haven settled into its familiar quiet rhythms, Mark found Vivien on the back terrace despite the October chill. She wore a heavy sweater and seemed lost in contemplation of the lake's dark surface. Thinking about anything in particular? He asked, settling beside her with 2 cups of tea. Thinking about time, she replied, accepting the warm cup with hands. That required more concentration to hold steady than they had 6 months earlier. How it moves differently when you know it's limited versus when you assume it's infinite. Different how? When I thought I had forever, I spent years building a business empire and accumulating wealth, always assuming I'd figure out the personal happiness part later. Now that I know my time is measured, every ordinary moment feels precious. She sipped her tea carefully, watching Lily practice, listening to you talk about your day, falling asleep next to someone who loves me. These simple things have become the most valuable experiences of my life. Mark studied her profile in the moonlight, seeing both the successful businesswoman who'd built a fortune and the vulnerable woman who'd risked everything on the possibility of authentic connection. Do you have regrets? About how you spent the years before your diagnosis. I have regrets about waiting so long to come home to Pine Haven, about letting fear keep me from relationships that might have brought meaning to my life earlier. Vivien turned to face him directly. But I don't regret the path that led me to you and Lily, even if that path was longer and lonelier than it needed to be. And now, are you happy with the life we've built together? Happy doesn't begin to cover what I feel about our life together. Her voice carried absolute certainty despite its physical tremor. Mark, you and Lily have given me the experience of being loved for who I am rather than what I can provide. That's a gift most people never receive, regardless of how long they love. You've given us the same gift, Mark replied. Financial security, yes, but more importantly, you've shown Lily what it looks like to pursue excellence with dignity and grace. And you've shown me that it's possible to love someone new without betraying the memory of someone who came before. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the sounds of Pine Haven's evening rhythms and the weight of their shared understanding about time's preciousness. Around them, the restored gardens held the last flowers of autumn, beautiful and temporary and worth celebrating precisely because they wouldn't last forever. The dedication ceremony for Sarah's memorial program. Vivien said eventually, I'd like to contribute something beyond just funding. Maybe a scholarship specifically for students from single-parent families or resources for families dealing with medical challenges. Sarah would love that. She always said that talent was equally distributed, but opportunity wasn't. Then we'll make sure opportunity finds its way to the children who need it most. Vivian's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who'd found meaningful ways to use her resources. It's strange. I spent decades accumulating wealth for its own sake, but now I understand that money's only real value is its ability to create possibilities for others. Speaking of creating possibilities, Mark said, Elena mentioned that Lily might be ready for some small solo performances. Nothing as formal as competitions, but recitals where she can share her music with audiences who appreciate serious young talent. How does Lily feel about that prospect? Excited and terrified in equal measure. But she's been watching videos of young pianists performing, and she's starting to understand that sharing music is different from just practicing it. Performance anxiety is something we can help her manage. I've given my share of high pressure. Presentations and the techniques that work in boardrooms often translate to concert stages. Mark found himself smiling at the image of his wife, coaching their daughter through performance. Nerves using corporate presentation strategies. Their unconventional family continued to find strength in unexpected combinations of experience and perspective. Vivien, he said, whatever challenges we face with your health, whatever adaptations we need to make, I want you to know that this year has been the happiest of my life since Sarah died. You've given me back the experience of being married to someone I love and respect and enjoy spending time with. Even knowing that our time together will be shorter than most marriages, especially knowing that, it makes every day feel intentional instead of accidental. The next morning brought their first real test of the support systems they'd been building. Vivien woke with increased tremors and balance issues that made her usual morning routine challenging, and Mark found himself stepping naturally into a more assistive role without making the adjustments feel clinical or pitying. It's frustrating, Vivien admitted as Mark helped her with buttons that had become difficult to manage. My mind feels completely normal, but my body isn't responding the way it should. What would help? Today, specifically? Honesty about limitations without catastrophizing about the future. And maybe staying close to home so I don't have to navigate unfamiliar environments while I'm having a difficult day. Mark adjusted their plans accordingly, canceling a trip to the city they'd planned and instead creating a quiet day centered around home and family. Lily, with the sensitivity that had grown alongside her musical abilities, seemed to understand intuitively that Vivien needed gentle support rather than anxious hovering. The afternoon found all three of them in the music room, with Lily practicing. While Mark and Vivien listened from their comfortable chairs, they'd arranged for exactly this purpose. The sound of Chopin filled the space with beauty that transcended the day's challenges, reminding them all that some forms of grace existed, independent of physical limitations or temporal boundaries. This is what I want to remember, Vivien said, quietly, her hand finding Mark's, as they listened to their daughter transform notes into something approaching magic. Not the symptoms or the medications or the progressive loss of control, but the music and the love and the ordinary miracle of being part of a family that chose each other. Mark squeezed her trembling fingers gently, understanding that they were creating memories that would need to sustain them through whatever difficulties lay ahead. But for now, in this moment, they were simply a family listening to beautiful music in their peaceful home, grateful for the gift of time and the wisdom to use it well. 2 years after their wedding, Mark stood in the wings of Pine Haven's newly renovated community center, watching Lily adjust her performance dress one final time before her first solo recital. At 14, she'd grown into the early promise of her talent, her playing now marked by the kind of musical maturity that made audiences forget her youth. Tonight's recital would showcase pieces from her pre-conservatory work and serve as both celebration and farewell. Lily had been accepted into the full summer intensive program at last, a natural progression that filled Mark with pride and bittersweet anticipation. Vivien sat in the front row, her wheelchair positioned to provide an optimal view of the stage, while accommodating the mobility challenges that had progressed more rapidly than any of them had hoped. The aggressive treatment protocols had slowed her decline, but couldn't halt it entirely, and the past 6 months had required significant adaptations to their daily routines. Yet her eyes remained bright with intelligence and love, and her presence continued to anchor their family through the difficult adjustments. 5 minutes to curtain, announced Mrs. Patterson, who'd volunteered to coordinate the evening's logistics with the efficient enthusiasm she brought to all community events. Lily nodded, her expression focused, but calm, a remarkable transformation. From the nervous 12-year-old who'd auditioned for the conservatory program 2 years earlier, the pre-conservatory training had given her not just technical skill, but genuine confidence in her ability to share music with others. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Mark asked, straightening her collar with the careful attention to detail that had become second nature. "Ready," she said simply, and Mark could see that she meant it completely. "Excited to share what I've learned. Excited to show people what music can do when you really listen to it." Elena Vasquez approached from the other side of the stage area, her presence both professional and warmly supportive. Over 2 years of working together, she'd become much more than Lily's instructor. She'd evolved into a mentor whose guidance extended far beyond technical musical instruction. "Your wife wanted me to give you this," Elena said, handing Mark a folded note written in Vivian's increasingly careful handwriting. Mark opened the paper and read, "For Lily tonight you share the gift that Sarah recognized and that our entire family has nurtured. Play with the joy that music brings you, and let that joy reach everyone who hears you. We are so proud of the artist and the person you've become. Love, Vivien." He passed the note to Lily, watching her face brighten as she read her stepmother's words. Despite the physical limitations that had increasingly confined Vivien to home, her emotional support for Lily's musical development had never wavered. "Places, everyone," Mrs. Patterson called softly, and Mark felt the familiar flutter of parental anxiety mixed with overwhelming pride. Lily walked onto the stage with poise that belied her age, settling at the piano bench with the same focused attention she brought to practice sessions at home. The small audience filled with Pine Haven residents, fellow students from the conservatory program, and Mrs. Crawford beaming from her customary spot in the third row fell silent as she positioned her hands above the keys. The first piece was Bach, chosen to demonstrate technical precision and classical understanding. Lily's fingers moved with assured confidence, each note clear and purposeful, building the intricate architecture of counterpoint with mathematical beauty. Mark found himself holding his breath, marveling at his daughter's complete absorption in the music. But it was the second piece, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, that truly showcased what Lily had become as a musician. The piece required not just technical skill, but emotional interpretation, the ability to tell a story through dynamics and phrasing and the subtle variations that separated mere playing from genuine artistry. As Lily's hands moved across the keys, the music seemed to breathe with its own life, carrying the audience through landscapes of beauty and melancholy that spoke to something deeper than mere entertainment. Mark glanced at Vivien during the Chopin, seeing tears streaming down her face as she listened with the complete attention she'd brought to every one of Lily's performances over the past 2 years. Despite the tremor that affected her movements, her focus remained absolute, her love for their daughter radiating through her expression. The final piece was Lily's own choice, a contemporary composition that allowed her to demonstrate the breadth of her musical understanding. She'd selected a work by a living composer, something that spoke to current musical language while honoring classical traditions. The piece was complex and demanding, requiring both technical precision and interpretive courage, and Lily performed it with a kind of artistic confidence that suggested a genuine musical future. As the last notes faded into silence, the audience erupted in applause that went far beyond polite appreciation. Mark heard genuine excitement in the response, the recognition that they'd witnessed something special, not just a talented young person playing difficult music, but an artist sharing something meaningful with her community. Lily stood and acknowledged the applause with gracious composure, her smile radiant with the satisfaction of having successfully shared her passion with others. Mark felt his chest swell with pride that went beyond parental bias. His daughter had truly become the musician Sarah had envisioned, someone capable of bringing beauty into the world through her extraordinary gifts. During the reception that followed, Mark mingled with audience members whose responses confirmed what he'd witnessed during the performance. Judge Peterson spoke about Lily's remarkable growth as both musician and young person. Elena discussed plans for the summer intensive program with the enthusiasm of a teacher who'd helped guide exceptional talent toward its full potential. Mrs. Crawford wiped away tears while describing how proud Sarah would have been of her daughter's artistic development. But it was Tom's comment that struck Mark most deeply. "You know, watching Lily tonight, I kept thinking about how some people are meant to bring light into the world. She's got that quality, the ability to make everyone around her feel like beautiful things are possible. Beautiful things are possible." The phrase echoed in Mark's mind as he helped Vivien navigate the crowded reception space, her wheelchair requiring careful attention to logistics, but not preventing her from fully participating in their daughter's celebration. "She was magnificent," Vivien said, as they found a quiet corner where they could talk without shouting over the crowd. "Absolutely magnificent." "Did you see how the audience responded during the Chopin? That wasn't just appreciation. That was genuine emotional connection." "I saw you crying," Mark teased gently. "I was remembering the first time I heard her practice in our music room, how raw and unformed her talent was then compared to what she's become." Vivien's voice carried wonder despite its physical limitations. "Mark, we've watched her transform from a gifted child into a genuine artist. That's not something every parent gets to witness." Before Mark could respond, Lily appeared beside them, still glowing with the aftermath of successful performance and obviously energized by the positive responses she'd received. "Did you hear what Elena said about the summer program?" she asked, settling cross-legged on the floor beside Vivien's wheelchair with the easy informality that characterized their family dynamic. "She thinks I'm ready for the advanced track, working with students who are preparing for conservatory auditions. How do you feel about that level of intensity?" Mark asked, understanding that the summer program would represent a significant step toward professional-level musical training. Excited and grateful. Lily's expression grew serious for a moment. "I know how much sacrifice and support it's taken to get me to this point. From both of you, from Mrs. Crawford, from Elena, even from people in town who've been cheering me on since I was little." "It's not sacrifice when it's for someone you love," Vivien said gently. "And it's not sacrifice when you're investing in beauty and art, and the possibility that someone's gifts might make the world a better place." "Still," Lily continued, I want you both to know that I understand how lucky I am. Not just to have talent, but to have people who believed in it enough to help me develop it properly." The conversation was interrupted by Elena's approach, her expression carrying the mixture of professional satisfaction and personal affection that had characterized her relationship with their family. "Lily, that was truly exceptional playing tonight," she said, settling into a nearby chair. "But beyond the technical achievement, you showed real artistic maturity up there. The way you shaped the chop and phrases, the emotional arc you created through the entire program, that's not something that can be taught. That comes from genuine musical understanding." "What happens now?" Mark asked. "With the summer program, with her continued development? Now we focus on preparing her for the next level of challenges while making sure she maintains the joy and curiosity that make her special as an artist." Elena's tone was thoughtful. "The summer intensive will expose her to new repertoire, different teaching approaches, and peer musicians who share her level of commitment. It's designed to answer the question of whether someone is ready for serious conservatory training. And if she is ready, then we start planning for high school programs that can support continued musical development alongside academic preparation. There are residential art schools, pre-professional programs, pathways that could lead to conservatory training, or university music programs." Mark felt a familiar mixture of excitement and trepidation at the scope of possibilities opening before his daughter. 2 years earlier, such opportunities had seemed financially impossible. Now they represented choices to be made based on Lily's interests and aptitudes rather than economic limitations. "What do you want, Lily?" Vivien asked, directing the question to the person whose future was being discussed. "Not what you think we want for you, or what other people expect, but what feels right to you." Lily considered the question with the seriousness she brought to important decisions. "I want to keep learning and growing as a musician. I want to find out how far my talent can take me, how much beauty I might be able to create and share with others." She paused, then continued with touching honesty. "But I also want to stay connected to home, to you guys, to the community that supported me. I don't want success to mean leaving behind the people who helped make it possible." "Success doesn't have to mean abandonment," Elena assured her. "The best artists maintain connections to the communities and relationships that shape them. Those roots often become sources of inspiration that fuel continued creativity." As the reception wound down and people began making their departures, Mark found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought their family to this moment. 3 years earlier, he'd been a desperate man facing financial ruin and limited options for his daughter's future. The marriage proposal that had seemed like either salvation or moral compromise had evolved into something he couldn't have imagined. Genuine partnership that had created opportunities for growth and happiness none of them had expected. Driving home through Pine Haven's quiet streets, with Vivien dozing in the passenger seat and Lily chattering softly about the evening's highlights. From the back seat, Mark felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the improbable family they'd become. The Carlisle estate came into view, its windows glowing warmly against the darkness, representing not just shelter, but the home they'd created together, through love and determination, and the willingness to see possibility in unexpected circumstances. That night, after helping Vivien with her evening routine and ensuring Lily was settled with the satisfied exhaustion that followed successful performance, Mark stood in the music room where so much of their family's joy had been cultivated. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the piano where Lily had transformed from a talented child into a genuine artist. "She's remarkable," Vivien said from the doorway, her voice carrying both pride and the kind of wistfulness that had become more frequent as her physical limitations increased. "Tonight, watching her perform, I felt like I was witnessing the future Sarah dreamed of for her." Mark turned to help her navigate into the room, noting how the wheelchair had become less of an accommodation and more of a necessity over recent months. The progression of her Parkinson's had accelerated despite the best medical care, but her spirit remained undaunted, her love for their family undimmed by physical challenges. Sarah would have been so proud, Mark agreed, settling beside her, near the piano where they'd spent countless evenings listening to Lily practice. But she would have been equally proud of what you've contributed to Lily's development, the opportunities you've provided, the support you've given, the way you've loved her like your own daughter. That's not something Sarah could have imagined when she was making plans for Lily's future. I never expected to become a mother at this stage of my life, Vivien admitted, her voice soft with wonder. But watching Lily grow, being part of her musical journey, seeing her develop into such a remarkable young woman, it's been one of the greatest privileges of my life. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the echoes of evening's beautiful music and the weight of their shared understanding about time's passage. Outside, Pine Haven rested peacefully, a community that had embraced their unconventional family and supported Lily's artistic development with the kind of genuine investment that small towns could provide when they chose to nurture rather than judge. Mark, Vivien said eventually, there's something I need to discuss with you. About the future, about arrangements that need to be finalized while I'm still able to make clear decisions. Mark felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied conversations about Vivien's progressive decline. What kind of arrangements? Legal documents mostly. Updates to my will, healthcare directives, provisions for Lily's continued education, and your financial security. Her tone remained matter-of-fact, but Mark could see the effort the clinical detachment required. I want everything clearly defined, so that when my condition deteriorates further, you can focus on caring for our family instead of worrying about legal complications. How much time are we talking about? Dr. Martinez thinks I have perhaps 6 months before the symptoms become significantly more challenging to manage. Maybe a year before I'll need the kind of care that might interfere with normal family life. The timeline hit Mark like a physical blow, though he'd been preparing for this conversation for months. 6 months barely long enough to see Lily through her summer intensive program, not nearly enough time for all the experiences he'd hoped to share with the woman who'd become his partner in every meaningful sense. What can I do? How can I help you prepare? Love me completely while you can. Help Lily understand that losing me doesn't mean losing the security and opportunities we've built together. And promise me that when the time comes, you'll make decisions based on what's best for the living rather than what's most comfortable for the dying. Mark reached for her hands, no longer surprised by their tremor, but still moved by their warmth and the wedding ring that had come to symbolize their genuine commitment, despite their unconventional beginning. I promise to love you completely, for whatever time we have. I promise to help Lily understand that security isn't just financial, it's emotional and spiritual, and based on the knowledge that she's deeply loved by people who believe in her potential. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But I can't promise to prioritize my comfort over your needs, Vivien. Caring for you isn't a burden. It's a privilege that comes with loving someone. Even when caring becomes difficult? Even when I'm no longer the woman you married, but someone diminished by illness? Especially then. Because that's what love means. Choosing to see someone's essential worth, even when their circumstances change. Vivien's tears came silently, and Mark found himself holding her while she cried for the future they wouldn't have together and the gradual loss of independence that lay ahead. But underneath the sadness, Mark sensed something else: relief that she wouldn't face the difficult progression alone, gratitude for the family they'd built together, and peace about the legacy she would leave through Lily's continued development. There's something else, Vivien said when her tears had subsided. Something I've been working on that I want to share with you. She directed him to her desk, where a leather portfolio contained documents he hadn't seen before. Inside were plans for a comprehensive scholarship program, not just for Pine Haven students, but for young musicians from economically disadvantaged backgrounds throughout the region. The Lily Ortega Music Education Foundation, Mark read aloud. Vivien, it's my way of ensuring that what happened for our family, the unexpected opportunity that changed everything, becomes available to other families facing similar challenges. Her voice strengthened with purpose. I've been working with lawyers and education specialists for months, creating something that will outlast my lifetime and continue creating possibilities for talented young people. Mark studied the comprehensive plan scholarships for private instruction, funding for instruments and sheet music, support for families dealing with medical or financial hardships, while nurturing children's artistic development. The foundation would be funded by a significant portion of Vivien's estate, administered by a board that included Elena, Mrs. Crawford, and other music education professionals. Why Lily's name? She's still so young. Because she represents the possibility that talent and family support and community investment can create something beautiful, even when circumstances seem impossible. Vivien's smile carried deep satisfaction. And because I want her to understand that gifts come with responsibilities, that those who receive opportunities have obligations to create opportunities for others. Have you discussed this with her? Not yet. I wanted your approval first, and I wanted to be sure the legal framework was solid. Vivien paused. But Mark, I also want Lily to be involved in the foundation's work as she grows older. Not just as a namesake, but as someone who understands firsthand how the right support can transform a young person's future. The next morning brought Lily's discovery of the foundation plans, and her reaction exceeded both parents' expectations. Rather than being overwhelmed by the responsibility of having a scholarship program bear her name, she was energized by the possibility of helping other young musicians access the kind of instruction and support she'd received. Can we start with Pine Haven students? She asked, studying the foundation documents with remarkable maturity. There are kids in my school who have musical talent but can't afford lessons or instruments. Maybe we could create a pipeline from elementary school through high school, giving them the same kind of progressive support I've had. That's exactly the kind of thinking the foundation needs, Vivien said, pride evident in her voice, despite its increasing frailty. You understand that success creates obligations. I understand that I've been incredibly lucky, and that luck should be shared. Lily's expression grew thoughtful. Elena always says that the best musicians are those who remember where they came from and help others follow similar paths. Over the following weeks, their family threw themselves into finalizing the foundation plans while enjoying the precious ordinariness of daily life together. Lily continued her pre-conservatory work while helping research potential scholarship recipients. Mark managed the hardware store and assisted with Vivien's increasing care needs while participating in foundation planning meetings. Vivien worked with lawyers and education specialists to ensure the foundation's long-term sustainability while savoring every moment of family life that her condition still allowed. The Sarah Ortega Memorial Music Education Initiative launched its first programs, serving elementary students in Pine Haven with basic music instruction and instrument loans. The Lily Ortega Music Education Foundation prepared to award its first scholarships to regional students whose families couldn't afford advanced musical training. Both programs represented the transformation of personal loss and unexpected opportunity into community resources that would benefit future generations. 3 months after Lily's solo recital, Mark stood in the same community center, but this time as a speaker at the foundation's inaugural scholarship ceremony. Before him sat families whose circumstances reminded him of his own struggles. 3 years earlier, parents who recognized their children's talents but lacked resources to properly support their development. 3 years ago, Mark began, his voice carrying across the expectant audience. I was a widowed father facing financial ruin and impossible choices about my daughter's future. I thought success meant handling everything alone, that accepting help was a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. He paused, looking out at Vivien in her wheelchair in the front row, her attention focused, despite the visible effort concentration now required, and at Lily beside her, radiant with the confidence that came from knowing her talents were valued and supported. What I learned is that sometimes the most important thing we can do is recognize when we need help and have the courage to accept it when it's offered with genuine love. Mark's voice strengthened with conviction. These scholarships represent more than financial assistance. They represent our community's commitment to nurturing talent, wherever it appears, regardless of economic circumstances. The ceremony continued with the announcement of the first scholarship recipients, 5 young musicians, whose families had demonstrated both need and commitment to their children's artistic development. Mark watched parents' faces transform with relief and gratitude that reminded him powerfully of his own emotions. When Vivien had first offered to solve his impossible financial equation, but it was Lily's brief speech that captured the heart of what they'd all learned about opportunity and responsibility. Music taught me that beautiful things are possible, even when everything else feels difficult, she said, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the audience. These scholarships are our way of saying that every child deserves the chance to discover what beauty they might be able to create and share with the world. 6 months later, Mark stood beside Vivien's hospital bed, holding her hand while she slept peacefully under the care of the hospice team that had become part of their extended family. The progression of her Parkinson's had accelerated beyond medical control, but her final weeks had been filled with the kind of intentional love and gratitude that transformed even difficult circumstances into opportunities for grace. Lily sat in the corner chair, practicing fingering exercises on her silent keyboard, while maintaining the vigil that had become their family's way of ensuring Vivien never faced difficult moments alone. At 15, Lily had matured into someone capable of facing loss with courage while still maintaining the joy that made her music so compelling. "She's been such a gift," Lily said quietly, not wanting to wake her stepmother, but needing to voice what she'd been feeling. "I know she didn't expect to become a mom when she married you, but she's been exactly what we needed." "She's been exactly what I needed too," Mark replied, watching Vivien's face in the afternoon light that streamed through hospital windows. "Someone who saw possibilities where I saw only problems, who believed in building something beautiful, even when time was limited." Vivien stirred slightly, her eyes opening with the careful focus that had characterized her final months. "Are you two talking about me?" she asked, her voice weak, but carrying the gentle humor that had sustained them through difficult transitions. "Only good things," Lily assured her, moving to kiss her stepmother's forehead with a natural affection that had developed between them. "I should hope so." Vivien's smile was slight but genuine. "How are the summer intensive preparations going?" "Everything's ready. Elena thinks I'm prepared for the advanced track, and I'm excited about working with new teachers and meeting other serious musicians." Lily's enthusiasm was tempered by awareness of what she would miss while she was away. "But I wish the timing was different." "The timing is perfect," Vivien said firmly. "This is exactly when you should be focusing on your music and your growth as an artist. That's what families do. They create circumstances where the next generation can flourish, even when life becomes complicated for the adults." That evening, as sunset painted the hospital room in soft gold, Vivien made her final request. "I want you both to promise me that you'll keep making music together. Mark, learn to play piano so you can accompany Lily sometimes. Lily, teach your father what I couldn't, that creating beauty is more important than creating profit." "I promise," they said together, and Mark felt the weight of commitment that went far beyond words. Vivien passed peacefully in her sleep 2 days later, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and the love she'd helped create. Her final weeks had been marked not by regret or fear, but by gratitude for the unexpected second chapter she'd found in Pine Haven and the knowledge that her support had transformed not just one family, but an entire community's approach to nurturing young talent. The memorial service filled Pine Haven's largest church, with attendees ranging from business associates who'd known Vivien as a successful CEO to community members who'd experienced her quiet generosity. But it was Lily's performance of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, major the piece that had helped secure her conservatory audition, that best captured who Vivien had been and what she'd contributed to their lives. As the final notes faded into reverent silence, Mark felt not just grief for what they'd lost, but overwhelming gratitude for what they'd gained. Vivien's love had transformed their struggling family into something resilient and hopeful. Her vision had created opportunities that would benefit young musicians for generations. Her courage in facing terminal illness had taught them all how to live fully, even when time was limited. 1 year later, Mark stood in the Pine Haven Community Center, watching Lily perform as featured soloist with the Regional Youth Orchestra, opportunity that had materialized through connections made during her conservatory training. At 16, she'd grown into the promise of her early talent, her playing marked by technical precision and emotional depth that spoke to audiences on levels that transcended mere entertainment. In the audience, Elena beamed with the pride of a teacher whose student had exceeded every expectation. Mrs. Crawford wiped away tears of joy for the girl she'd taught from childhood through artistic maturity. Tom and Mrs. Henderson sat in their customary seats, representing the community support that had helped nurture Lily's development from the beginning. But it was the empty seat beside Mark left deliberately open in Vivien's honor that reminded him most powerfully of the journey they'd traveled together. The marriage that had begun as a business arrangement had evolved into the deepest partnership of his life. The desperate financial circumstances that had once threatened to limit Lily's future had been transformed into opportunities that seemed boundless. As Lily took her bows to enthusiastic applause, Mark felt Sarah's presence alongside Vivien's, both women who'd loved their daughter enough to envision futures greater than present circumstances suggested. The hardware store that had once been a symbol of struggle now provided steady income thanks to trust funds Vivien had established. The Carlisle estate that had once intimidated him now felt like home, filled with memories of family dinners and piano practice and conversations that had shaped them all. Most importantly, Lily had grown into someone capable of carrying forward the legacy of love and support she'd received. The scholarship foundation bearing her name had already helped dozens of young musicians access advanced training. The Sarah Ortega Memorial Music Education Initiative served hundreds of elementary students annually. The ripple effects of one woman's desperate proposal and one man's reluctant acceptance continued expanding outward, creating possibilities neither could have imagined. After the concert, as they drove home through Pine Haven's familiar streets, Lily turned to her father with the serious expression she brought to important observations. "Dad, do you think Vivien knew? When she first proposed to you, do you think she understood that it would become real love instead of just a business arrangement?" Mark considered the question, remembering the woman who'd walked into his hardware store with an impossible offer, and the gradual revelation of vulnerability beneath her corporate confidence. "I think she hoped it might become real, but I don't think she expected it to become as deep and meaningful as it did," he said finally. Sometimes the best things in life start as practical solutions and evolve into something more profound than anyone anticipated. Like how my piano lessons started as just something to keep me busy after Mom died, but became the center of everything I want to do with my life. Exactly like that. As they pulled into their driveway, Mark felt the familiar gratitude that had replaced the desperate anxiety of 3 years earlier. The house that had once belonged to someone else now represented home in every meaningful sense. The financial security that had once seemed impossible now provided freedom to make choices based on values rather than survival needs. The future that had once appeared constrained by circumstances now stretched ahead with possibilities limited only by imagination and determination. Inside, Mark found the letter Vivien had written for this exact moment 1 year after her death. When grief had settled into memory and their family had fully adapted to her absence. He'd discovered it among her papers, marked with instructions about when it should be opened. "My dearest Mark and Lily," he read aloud as they settled in the music room, where so much of their family's joy had been cultivated. "If you're reading this, it means you've survived the first year without me and are beginning to understand that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into legacy." The letter continued with Vivien's hopes for their future, Mark's continued happiness, and potential for finding love again if the opportunity arose, Lily's musical development, and the ways her talents might contribute to the world's beauty. Their family's ongoing role in supporting other young artists through the foundation programs. "Remember that our marriage began with a business proposal, but became something neither of us expected. Proof that the heart can find its way to love even through the most unlikely circumstances," Vivien had written. "What we built together wasn't limited by the time we had, but enriched by the knowledge that every moment was precious." The letter concluded with a challenge. Live fully, love completely, and trust that the future holds possibilities you can't yet imagine. The best chapters of your story are still being written. As Mark folded the letter carefully, he realized that Vivien's words captured not just their specific journey, but something universal about resilience and hope. Their story had begun with desperation and an outrageous proposition, but it had evolved into something that proved the transformative power of love when it was offered freely and received with courage. 2 years later, as Mark watched Lily graduate as valedictorian from Pine Haven High School before heading to conservatory, training that would launch her toward a professional musical career, he understood finally what Vivien had meant about legacy. Their unusual family's impact extended far beyond their own happiness. It had created models and resources and inspiration that would benefit their community for generations. The struggling single father, who'd once accepted a $1 million marriage proposal, had become a man who understood that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased, only received as gifts from those brave enough to love without guarantees. The story that had seemed like it might be about survival had become, instead, a testament to the possibilities that emerged when people chose to see potential rather than problems, to build bridges rather than walls, to trust that love could flourish even in the most unexpected circumstances. In the end, Vivian Carlisle's outrageous proposal had been answered not just with acceptance, but with a love that proved worthy of the risks they'd both taken on, the possibility that two wounded souls might create something beautiful together. Their legacy lived on in the music Lily brought to the world, the opportunities the foundation created for other families, and the example they'd provided that sometimes the most important thing people can do is remain open to love, even when it arrives in forms they never expected to recognize.